meeting, it'll be like a regular meeting using these microphones. Should be able to hear in that speaker. Yeah, it was just because we were doing the shade meeting, we didn't want to overlap with.
And everybody is on Zoom? We got Jamie, you're on, Bruce, you're on? Good.
I'm on.
Thank you.
I probably need to get on
Okay.
this one, because I was on the.
The other one, yeah. You'll have to close out the other one and get on the new one. It's on your calendar if you want to find it there, I think. No, it's not, sorry.
Have we let people in yet, Ryan? No, I mean, into the YouTube, it still says 112 waiting.
So far, we have four board members on. We have Carrie on, Rob, me, and Heather.
76 watching now.
So we still need Bruce, we still need Sue, we still need Bob.
I'm coming in right now. It says tonight's Zoom link.
Oh, do we have to be on Zoom too?
Yes.
11:38. I'm sorry.
What's the time of the email?
11:38.
Okay.
I can send it to you again if you need it.
Please do. I didn't know we needed to do that.
It just helps with the YouTube. Makes it a little more.
What Ryan will do then is he'll put you on, you're talking, so that it's not just the whole review.
Oh, Carrie, you're on.
Carrie's on.
Yep, Carrie's on. Rob's on.
Just send it to you, Bob.
Sue now is on.
Rob's on.
Just waiting for Bob.
And Nick, I'm ready to go with your document. Whenever.
Did you say you're selling t-shirts, Sue?
No, this is a very special promotion t-shirt.
And the only thing I want to do is people out in the parking lot, I want to make sure none of, there's people out in the parking lot, I want to make sure none of them want to speak, and then we can get started.
Okay.
I was wondering if you also sold sunglasses.
That's what you're all gonna get when I leave this.
That will be my gift to you.
And right now, it's great big dryer.
There's quite a delay, because right now online, on YouTube, I'm only showing 11 people.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Hey, Bruce, they look really great with the mask.
Yeah, indeed, right?
Okay. And I do not have the Zoom stuff up on my board, so
So tell me again, we're not,
I'm going to minimize the Zoom. I'm just going to go based on the cameras up there, and because I want to have access to the agenda and stuff.
so I keep my mic off.
Do we know why it's only showing 12 on YouTube?
Bob is on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Nick, I'm sorry to
6,
ask you this again,
2.
but we're not using the mic.
Nope, this mic, right here. Yep, just like you were in normal meeting.
Okay, we have all board members on. Are we ready to call the meeting to order yet?
I just want to make sure, Dave, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Okay. Carrie, can you do a check with your sound? Dave, can you hear Carrie?
No, I did not hear Carrie at all.
Rob, you want to do a sound check?
Check, check.
Yep, we got Rob.
Bruce?
Test.
Yes. You passed the test.
Yes, am I on? Can you hear me?
Heather, you want to check yours?
Check, check,
Can you hear me?
Yes, got you, Heather.
check,
You hear Bob?
Yep.
check, check, check.
Yep.
Sue?
Buonasera.
No, it was translated. There's something wrong with the technology.
Dave, it's grazie, not grace.
Is your button up? Okay. Could you hear Carrie at all, Dave?
No, still nothing.
And can you hear me, Dave?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I think someone else's microphone is picking you up.
Can you hear me now?
Just working through a few of the technical pieces, just want to make sure everybody can hear all the board
Can we
members.
try it again?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Hey, Dave, how about now?
Yep, that's perfect. Now I
Okay,
got you.
thanks.
Okay, ready? Call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first up under citizens' request to speak about non-action items. We had several submissions to board members within the last 48 hours and actually going back longer than that. We've heard from many people regarding the blueprint for reopening for learning, but what we're going to do is just ask for folks who are speaking to the board that would then add to the several letters that all board members received. And those are items that were submitted prior to 4 p.m. today. In no particular order, we have 4 speakers, so we have each has 3 minutes. And if Kim Benke of Jordan Lane and Hudson is ready to speak, please go up to the microphone.
Kim, do you want to just check, and I want to have Dave make sure that his mic's on?
And I want to thank the public for your patience while we worked on technical issues to make sure that this everyone could be heard.
You want to try it again?
No, I cannot hear Kim right now.
Okay. You want to set it on a table or? I guess I should table it too.
Got this one.
We should have more, or the other one's out in the hall.
Oh, I think he's gonna grab something from the hall.
Perfect height. Get the button, is the button up on that?
But I am going to make a point of pointing it out.
Dave, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay! Woo!
Your time is up.
That seems unfair. Okay. All right. I'm Kim Banky, and I came tonight because as a teacher at HHS and a community member of Hudson, I know that this school year is going to present many challenges and situations we have not had to face before in education. One area I am concerned about is if HSD has to go to a hybrid or virtual setting, and what will staff do if they have their own children in the district. I am here to advocate for all staff members and ask the district to come up with a feasible childcare option for staff who will find themselves synchronously teaching and working from school. I have sent a detailed letter to Dr. Ouellette, Mr. Grambo, Ms. Wolker, and the school board with solutions and suggestions to help if this scenario plays out this year as a result of a spike in COVID-19 cases. Our district will already have teachers who live outside of Hudson who will need to take leaves as a result of their children's schools being hybrid or virtual already. We also know there is a substitute teacher shortage, and the pandemic will probably only decrease the already limited pool. By providing affordable childcare to our staff, we will be keeping teachers in their classrooms, which will help us with our ultimate goals, supporting and educating students and keeping our students learning and moving forward during the pandemic. Helping staff who live in and have school-age children in Hudson will benefit our community by allowing the staff to continue to provide quality educational content to students. With so many unknowns and fears, alleviating a major pressure for staff will also allow them to have more energy towards navigating synchronous learning and managing and adjusting to the new elements COVID is presenting us within our schools. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have Lori Harmon of Mound Drive in Hudson.
Thank you for having us here today to talk. I'm going to try to make mine a little bit faster than I have it laid out to be. I did send a copy of my letter to all the school board members as well as to Dr. Ouellette and Dave Grambo. I want to first preface anything that I have to say with the fact that I'm really focusing my statements on the science and what we know to be true. And to qualify that, I happen to be in a pretty rare position. My son-in-law has a PhD in theoretical physics and the highest government clearance. He's currently working as a research physicist with the Engineer Research and Development Center, ERDIC, lots and lots of acronyms here. And he's working with their COVID-19 modeling and simulation team, or CMAT. He and his team at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers were asked by the Chief of Engineers to stand up a COVID-19 forecasting capability to support federal domestic response efforts. This is, in this capacity, is now being used by the CDC as part of their official COVID-19 fatality forecast. Anyone can access that online. He is a high expert. And he is uniquely qualified to look at COVID data infection across the country, across the states, and as it turns out, also across St. Croix County. One of the comments that he made about St. Croix County when he looked at the data just yesterday was that the cumulative number of confirmed infections in St. Croix County continues to rise, supported by a 7-day rolling average of the number of new daily reported cases. And I've supplied a graph for you all. Through whatever lens the data are viewed, he says that they tell the same story. Infections in St. Croix County are trending up, not down, which is in contrast with federal guidelines for reopening of government facilities that require a minimum of 14-day decrease in the number of new daily infections. St. Croix County currently does not meet this requirement and will most likely not meet this requirement in the future coming months or at least weeks. He also looked at our program for providing for masks, but not necessarily guaranteeing 6 feet of distance. That is a huge problem. If you don't have masks coupled with distance, you are not going to have any chance of maintaining the virus in the way that you need to. And this is according to CDC's guidelines for school openings, which you can all access. They have a readiness assessment tool for that. Right now, as we stand, our proposal, he estimates or assesses that Hudson's current policies represent we fall under the highest risk of COVID-19 spread. In addition to that, if we look at the matrix or the metric, he was highly concerned about that, especially even accepting a 1 to 2% infection rate in a building was too much. He said the infections will rise exponentially and will likely risk overtaxing the healthcare system in place. I'm concerned about my students. I'm concerned about my colleagues. I'm concerned about my family. I'm concerned about myself. And I asked that with the rising trajectory of COVID-19 cases, the district's plan needs to be reconsidered because it currently fails to offer even half of the safety measures indicated by the CDC, which is masks plus distance, to keep our students, staff, and community out of danger. It proposes a bleak scenario as it allows for uncontained approach to the spread of the virus, with an unsafe school for our students, with unsafe working conditions for our staff, and with an unclear and dangerous matrix in place. Our health and the health of our families are entirely in your hands. Thank you for your consideration, and thank you for letting me go over time.
All right, thank you. Next up, Scott Ellingson.
Sorry for being so slow. Hopefully it didn't start yet. Take a look around this room right now. Is it smaller or bigger than a normal classroom? How many people are we allowing in this room right now? I think it's around 14, 15 people. Why aren't we allowing more? Think about your workplace. Did you work there today, or did you work from home? Does it have windows that open to the outside? If your workplace were a space about the size of a classroom, how many people would be allowed to gather together at one time? More than 15, 20, 25, 30? Why is that? Would your boss consider mixing in over 100 people throughout the day? Why not? As decisions are made about how to return to school, I want us to be mindful of the conditions under which those decisions are being made. I want us to be mindful of the conditions and the choice you are offering families and children for their learning this year. I want you to be mindful of the conditions and the lack of choice offered to your essential employees for their work this year. Are these decisions consistent with what a good employer would make? Are they consistent with what a good guardian of children would make? I want you to be mindful that many educators are literally scared to death about in-person instruction. Many are suffering tremendous anxiety. Choosing to have in-person instruction with over 80% of our students and all staff present each day is deliberately choosing to construct conditions by which it is nearly impossible to maintain the CDC recommended physical distancing guideline of at least 6 feet, the same guideline that is universally considered to be the safest method of risk mitigation for COVID-19. How can this not be considered to be putting children, their families, and your essential employees in harm's way? Face coverings are great, and I applaud you on your decision last meeting. But as we all know, face coverings don't make us safe without the distancing. So how do we keep everybody safe? Our safest bet is that everybody learns or works from home through distance learning. What's best for kids? We all want the same thing. We want the nightmare to end. We want our kid to be back in school. I want Benjamin, my 6th grader, and Jacob, my junior, to be back in school. Hudson's essential educators want their students back in school. We want to reopen our schools safely and equitably, but can we? Tonight, you have the power to control physical distancing in your schools, in our schools, and make our schools safer. The current blueprints put students and staff alike inherently at risk because consistent physical distancing is nearly impossible in all buildings. The blueprint should be also amended to make safety our district's #1 priority. Without feeling and being safe, students cannot maximize their full potential. I get that we are all working hard to make this right as we can for students. As leaders of the education and safety of the children and essential educators of Hudson, which option do you choose? You have the moral imperative to protect and educate. Please have the courage this evening to do the right thing. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for your comments. Our last requested speaker is not actually, doesn't appear to be a resident of the district, but works in the district, so Nick Simon. All right. If you could state your address, please, and, we'll allow you the 3 minutes, even if you're not
Okay.
a resident of the district.
Thank you. My name is Nick Simon. I'm about to start my 10th year teaching band at Hudson High School, and I live in St. Paul at 1486 Sargent Avenue. Like many of you, I've spent the last month worrying and researching how this upcoming school will affect my family, my students, and my colleagues. The proposed school closure metric uses COVID data to reevaluate the school format at a predetermined schedule. This is good. These adjustments protect students, staff, and community members from the increased contact of school reopening. However, the numbers in this plan make returning to school in Hudson significantly riskier than it is on the other side of the river. Under Minnesota's metric, we would be starting the school year with in-person elementary and hybrid secondary. Overall, the Hudson metric is about 1 or 2 steps behind the Minnesota metric. Hudson metrics does include an additional calculation for student staff COVID-19 daily positive rate average. I was a little confused by this. It sounds like some of my colleagues were too. As it reads, a 2% daily positive rate at Hudson High School is around 40 cases per day in one building. Building level infection rates would have to be over 100 times worse than our current county numbers before this plan puts any additional precautions in place. Starting the school year with some grades in a hybrid model drastically decreases the amount of close contacts in our building and allows them to stay open longer. Pennsylvania schools recently released the results of an agent-based model that estimates how long a school can stay open under different learning plans. According to this study, hybrid models allow school buildings to remain open 4 to 5 times longer than in-person models. If that's true, that means our students could have over twice as many in-person school days and 4 times the consistency if we switch to a hybrid model. For context, simple math with the current COVID infection rate, the size of our district, the death rates by age group gives us a few important estimates. If things stay as they are now, we should expect 0 student deaths. That's good. 3 staff deaths and 3 school household related deaths this school year. These are just theoretical estimates, and the school reopening plan is not solely responsible for what happens, but we cannot avoid responsibility for how we bring 6,000 people back into our school buildings. We must acknowledge that our reopening plan will affect the outcome of the pandemic in our community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I believe that concludes our comments from the public. And next up, we have superintendent reports. I'll turn it over to Dr. Aulette.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple different items on my COVID operational update that I want to touch base on, and I'll have a couple different folks from the cabinet team weighing in as well as we work through this. So first of all, update from St. Croix County. The latest data that we have available to us on the website is that there is 515 cases in St. Croix County. It looks to me there's 150 of those 154 active cases. There have been 7 deaths. The 3 additional deaths they had from last week were persons that were elderly and did have pre-existing conditions. There are 12 persons hospitalized in St. Croix County, not at Hudson Hospital. And the percent positive is about 5.1%, which the number's down a bit from previous weeks as far as they're looking at number of tests as it relates to, positive tests, overall tests. I think they've done right around almost 11,000. They've had almost 11,000 tests in St. Croix County. Results are mixed right now as far as waiting time on results. It's really all over the board. And as they're hopeful, what I had here from public health, they're hopeful that the numbers will continue to look better next week and the case count. So when we looked at on their website, the last 14 days, if we just count back 14 days, we've had about 91 cases from the 7th of August back 14 days, because that's the most current they have on their website. And when you look at that as it relates to per 10,000, we're sitting right around 10 cases per 10,000 because we have just right around 90,000 residents in St. Croix County. So it's just as you kind of look at that metric, in some places are looking at it as cases per 100,000. Some, Minnesota is looking at cases per 10,000. And so what we're trying to do is trying to put it into that perspective. When we did have the call from St. Croix County Public Health, they said it's still the largest number of and the vast majority of new cases is still coming in with those 20 to 30 somethings online, or I'm sorry, in the county. And so that is obviously a challenge for them as they work for it. When we start to look at what's happening around the state, before I get into the metric explanation, you may or may not be aware that the Speaker of the House did send a letter to superintendents around the state. It did not come to me directly. It did go to certain superintendents, I think, of those representatives that are in their representative districts, encouraging districts to consider opening if it's reasonable as you look at it. It does also talk about if your district decides to implement virtual learning, they strongly encourage us to implement where teachers are physically present in their classrooms and teaching in real time as if they were doing this in person. The head of WASDA, which is our Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators, responded to the speaker's letter on behalf of superintendents across the state. Obviously said we're dealing with some pretty major challenges right now. There's a lot of things going on. Thank the speaker for the letter, but I think really what they're looking for and what districts are looking for, he kind of broke it into different points. Broad flexibility in teacher and professional staff licensure. He talked about that as far as being able to keep a workforce and be able to find subs and things along those lines. And also looking at people that are willing to work in the profession beyond 2021 and thinking about how this could have long-term effects on districts. It did also address the ability for retired teachers or staff to return to work, because we do have, there's the anti-double dipping law that kind of went into effect where, if you're drawing your WRS, you can only work so many days. There are some districts that have had people that have quit because of COVID, would like to hire back people and are unable to, as far as other individuals that have retired. One of the things that's very concerning for all of us is the pupil counts in September, January, and summer school. Typically we look at the third Friday count in September and the second Friday count in January. But it's typically people that are in buildings on those days and looking for some flexibility, because you could have a drastic, change in enrollment, and our enrollment, our funding is tied to our enrollment. So asking the legislature basically to kind of hold harmless school districts as we try to work through that, and be able to count students as if that are in our virtual environment as if they are in our face-to-face environment as well. Transportation aid, obviously, transportation is a challenge, and we're working on some of those things. One of the things that has come up, they've asked, the superintendent group has asked for immunity from civil liability for schools. This is something that I think the legislature has done for medical professionals and medical providers. But again, there's as long as school districts are making good faith efforts to open as well as they can. Student assessments, the superintendent group is asking that the legislature waives the student assessment requirement for this coming school year, since we're not quite sure if we'll even be in school by the time we typically take assessments. We also would ask that the legislature waives the school and school district performance report cards as they did for this year, because we didn't end last year quite like we thought we would. Again, more flexibility with the Fund 46 eligibility and things along those that have to do with capital projects. It is a challenging time, as many people have brought up, and rarely do we make a decision that doesn't necessarily cause another hardship on another decision. And, oftentimes we don't have the ability to make decisions in a vacuum and say, we can only do this or we can only do that. We do have a lot of different competing interests as we look at this and different things going on. So I think John Bales, who's the executive director of WASA, did a nice job responding to the speaker's letter. I'll be sending the board both of those letters, just kind of got copies of those so that you have both the speaker's letter and basically the rebuttal from the Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators. As we kind of work through some different things, I know the metric is something that we did put out on Friday, and that's something that the plan was to talk about today. And I believe Tim is going to screen share for me the metric. Is that right, Tim?
Can you turn on screen sharing for me?
So what you have in front of you is the school closure metric. There's been a lot of questions for the district as to what is going to be your deciding factor, whether or not you stay open, you have to close, do a partial close. What does that look like? We also heard a lot of feedback from folks. Is there an option for some type of hybrid? Because our original blueprint did not have a hybrid option, and what could that potentially look like? And I think that, as we lay this out, I think a couple of things that everybody needs to keep in mind. We may need to adjust the plan based on staffing and sub shortages. I mean, it may cause us to have to go into a different level just based on where our staffing levels are. We may need to accelerate a school closure, due to a significant outbreak or anticipated outbreak as we look at it. And then I think that the third one is our center-based programming would default, or we would try to have as much face-to-face time with our kids that happen to be involved in our center-based programming as it relates to children with special needs. And so, there could be an environment where potentially the school could be virtual, yet we're still allowing kids with certain needs to come in and receive their services in the building as we work through that. So go ahead, Rob.
Would that include our CTE kids?
No, this would purely be related to special education.
Solely.
Yep. So as we look at it, we kind of came up with 4 levels. And in level 1 or green, essentially, everyone would be face-to-face. As of right now, that's kind of where we believe we are at as we get ready to start the school year. Early childhood and then 4K through 12 would be face-to-face. The second level, bumping it up, and this is where we start to get into that hybrid model. It would be early childhood, and then 4K through 6 plus 9th grade would be face-to-face. 7th and 8th and 10th through 12th would be hybrid. And some people might ask, okay, those numbers seem a little odd to me. Why 6th and why 9th? For multiple reasons. One, 6th grade is a huge transition year. It's when kids go from having one teacher a day to having multiple teachers a day. It is to try to get as much time, as many days as we can with those kids is the rationale behind it. 9th grade, the reason we would include 9th grade is it also is equally as big of a transition year. And research would tell us that if kids aren't on track in 9th grade to graduate, that can really cause problems. Actually, if they fail 2 or more classes their 9th grade year, they have less than a 50% chance of graduating. That's what our at-risk research would tell us. And so trying to have those kids in school as much as possible, face-to-face, with teachers working with them, is the rationale behind the 6th and the 9th. It would still allow us that if we did go hybrid 7 through 8 and 10 through 12, it still would reduce the amount of kids in the buildings when we move into that model. When we move to level 3, essentially what would happen is early childhood 4K through 6 plus 9 would move into a hybrid model, and then grades 7 and 8 and 10 through 12 would be virtual. And then level 4 would be 4K through 12 would be, and early childhood would be all virtual at that time. What I would like to do, and we're going to talk more about essentially the individual distance learning and what that looks like when they're working remotely. Dave's going to spend some time talking about that during the part of the meeting when we're talking about IDL and what that looks like. But what I could tell you as far as the days and what we're looking at is potentially it would be a Monday, Tuesday, and every other Wednesday would be one group. And the other group would be Thursday, Friday, and the opposite Wednesday. And so, as we've talked about before, we are upping our cleaning on a nightly basis. So there's not this need to all of a sudden take a day out to deep clean. And we want to try to get, so that over a 10-day period, kids would be in school at least 5 of the 10 days if we're in a hybrid model. The other thing with this is also this determination. We'll get into the actual metric itself, but what happens based on what that looks like is that these would be for 2-week time periods. So the state comes out on Wednesdays and updates by county their rates. One of the challenges that we've had in Wisconsin, and I don't think it's any big shock, is that sometimes you can look at St. Croix County and get 3 different numbers at the exact same time, depending on which website you go to. And, that creates a little bit of a challenge, obviously. And so right now we would be looking at what are the Wednesday numbers, essentially, that the state puts out. And it would be, what they're looking at is basically the 14-day burden or case rate for per 100,000. We would break it down to 10,000. So you're just basically dividing it by 10. We would look at that number on a Wednesday. So the first time we would look at that number after we start school would be September 2nd. So we start school on September 1st. It's a Tuesday. We would look at it on September 2nd. It would be a Wednesday. Barring not needing to just close like within hours, what we would do then is say, whatever determination is made, so based on which box each school is in, that would then go into effect the following Monday. And you can see that on the list. It would go into effect then on Monday, the 8th of September. What that does is it does 2 things. That if a school has to move in and out of hybrid or in and out of virtual or face-to-face, it does give parents at least 2 days heads up to try to adjust for childcare. That is a huge piece. To try to understand, what do I do with my kids if all of a sudden I'm told they're coming home a couple days a week and they're working. It's not a tremendous amount of time, but we think it's the least we can try to do so that we're not, calling this the next day. And we tried to do that this spring when the governor basically said, you have till Wednesday to close. And we took till Tuesday essentially to close to give parents enough time to adjust with their schedules and things like that. As we continue to work through this. Again, we may have to look at the numbers sooner or later, depending on what's happening in the county. The other piece is this chart or this metric would be by building, not by district. So this would be by building. So one could argue that you could have two buildings in the district that are running in different modes of operation. And what will happen is it will be posted on our website. It will be sent out to parents on that Wednesday, by building. This is where your building is. And this is what will be happening on the following Monday, but it would be by building. So there could be a situation where you could have potentially 0 to 10 cases per 10,000. And at Rivercrest, you're at 2%, or let's say 1.5%, and you're still at face-to-face. But at the middle school, you're at 2.5%. And so you would then be into hybrid instruction, and the high school might still be at face-to-face. It really is to look at it building by building, so that if we do have something going on in one building, we're not necessarily closing the whole district as it relates to it, or moving everybody in one direction or another. Does it create challenges? There's no doubt about it. Heather, do you have some?
Well, I wonder, Nick, I appreciate the concern about parents for whom childcare issues are a consideration. Primarily thinking that's probably elementary kids. I wonder though, rather than saying, because of that, we're going to wait 2 days to close school, would there be an option that says we're going to close school immediately, but we'll have some childcare available? And, or as an example, if it's the high school that needs to be closed down, why would we wait till Monday? Why wouldn't we close it the next day? Because those are not kids who have childcare concerns. I mean, I appreciate that it's complicated, and especially for parents of school age kids, but given the lag with the test data already, I mean, we're already behind the 8 ball when we're making this call. And so if there's a way to take action more immediately rather than giving it until the following Monday, I guess that's what I would like to see us do.
And really the rationale is twofold. It is the childcare piece. It is also teachers gearing up and being ready to go. I mean, they should be kind of in a constant state of that, but this is going to be new for us. And, we don't want to rush it. Yes, we understand that there are going to be some issues that may cause us to have to shut the next day. However, it's, I can tell you that the school districts that did not take the extra 2 days this spring and just sent everybody home that Friday really struggled with certain pieces because they just didn't have everybody with all the stuff they needed with them. I mean, those 2 days did become pretty valuable as we worked through it. Sue?
I just thought of one other conundrum, and that is transportation, because that's like, some kind of railroad, time scheduled.
Yeah, I mean, transportation, because it goes the other way too. It goes the other way where we could be potentially in a hybrid model and then kicking back to full-time face-to-face. And so it's trying to give us, a little bit of leeway. It's what is considered reasonable. If the board thinks that, hey, 2 days is just is too much time, because we likely won't have this data until late in the afternoon on Wednesday is when we'll, be making the determination. So it won't be as though we're making it Wednesday morning and we're really looking at 3 days. I mean, it will be probably late in the afternoon on Wednesday. It might be 4 or 5 o'clock by the time information is going out to parents. And the thought that we would just all of a sudden, hey, at 5 o'clock, get ready to potentially have your kids home more would be a challenge. And we can't just ramp up childcare overnight. We don't have the ability to do that. As much as we'd like to, we just don't have the ability to do that, especially if you're talking about a lot of kids.
Nick?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I would suggest also that if we do stay with the 2 days, if the announcement goes out on Wednesday night, that the following Monday, it'll be a different situation. A lot of parents will opt to keep their kids home anyway, knowing that risk exists in the building.
Yeah, I mean, there very well could be. I can tell you at the beginning, we were running, I think on that Monday, we were running over 75 to 80% attendance on that Monday when we stayed open, even after the government closed. And on Tuesday, we were still running 60-some%, I think, daily attendance. And that was during the height of people not quite knowing what exactly it was that we were dealing with. So we may have people that keep their kids home, and that's fine. It's just, I don't know how likely that'll be, considering that over 80% of our parents that are responding to our most recent survey are saying we'd like to send our kids 5 days a week. Yeah.
Sorry. May I?
Well, Rob was, I think,
Okay.
right.
So Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this table was modeled after Minnesota. Is that?
It is somewhat blended after Minnesota, yes.
Okay. And so we had a speaker tonight talk a little bit about comparing Minnesota and all the work they put into what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were modeling after Minnesota to some degree, that our result at this point, at least when we got into school, would be different than what we're currently doing. Can you talk a little bit to why we're full in at this point, especially secondary compared to what Minnesota's doing?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we try to do with this is really try to include building level data to also help out with the determinations. I mean, could this be shrunken down and all the cells be shifted left and remove potentially the column that is 11 to 20? Essentially, you just slide all the cells over. Yeah, I mean, we could absolutely do that, and it would almost completely mirror Minnesota's model. And we still have 5 different options. The one thing that we don't have an option with that Minnesota does is we don't have an option where we are K-12 hybrid. It's kind of one of those things where once we hit certain levels, the 4K to 6 plus 9, when they go to hybrid, basically the upper levels in that same situation then go to virtual. So we don't have, I mean, we have 4 levels. Minnesota does have the 5 levels to look at it. Right now, some people have said, where are we at with things? As I said, we're right now bouncing around between 9 and 10, 12 cases per 10,000 in the county at 14-day average. I mean, that's where we're bouncing. I mean, it's not, 1 week we might be down to 9, and the next week we might be up to 11, and it has grown since the start of COVID. However, the majority of days countywide we're in single digits. So the thought process was to try to look at what's happening in our county, look at what's happening in our buildings, and try to stay face to face as long as we feel we can. And if all of a sudden the county says no, then we need to close. Or if they're telling us this is too laxed of a plan, we can definitely adjust it. Absolutely. Heather has some.
I guess I would just encourage us to leave some latitude. I remember recently we were having a policy decision around furloughs. And it was whenever possible, we will give you X days notice. I can see how if we're moving 1 degree, that then it might be that we stick with this kind of 3-day plan. But if we're jumping from green to purple, then I think we would say effective tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
you know what I mean? So
absolutely.
I think to be clear with parents that this is kind of what we're hoping, and be making plans for parents, for teachers, because I would hope that, I mean, I'm not as worried about moving back into buildings because then we're working with just logistics, not health. But I mean, I think the primary driver here has to be keeping our staff and keeping our students safe. And so I guess I would just hope that would be a real consideration, and that if things are getting worse quickly enough, we would say, even if it's 4:00 Wednesday, this is effective tomorrow.
And that's part of why we put that disclaimer up there. We may need to accelerate a school closure due to a significant unanticipated outbreak. And so that would be both, not only would we potentially have to accelerate it so we wouldn't wait till Monday to start it, but it might be that we're not waiting till that next 2-week time period to even make the decision. So, I mean, again, this is like a guideline for us to use, but with the discretion that, okay, if we got to go quicker, we would go quicker, but but it's because it gets worse. I mean, it just based on, if you look at, even the stuff that Minnesota put out, it does take a drastic change in what's going on in the county to move from the 0 to 10 to 11 to 20. I mean, it does in theirs. I mean, it does take a drastic change in number of cases. And so it's not as though you're probably, the big issue is right now, we've kind of bounced between these 9 to 11. And so, if we were bouncing between potentially like 5 and 15 or 20, then you could, maybe look at it and say, okay, maybe we slide everything to the left for, to try to do it. It's just because we're literally bouncing between what, like I said, the state of Minnesota, even though we're in Wisconsin, and I get we're in Wisconsin, but what the state of Minnesota says is acceptable K-12 face-to-face is 0 to 10 per 10,000. and potentially being still acceptable for early childhood for K-6, but then hybrid at the high school as we go. Go ahead, Bruce.
So I'm going to bring a scenario forward that happens to be, my situation, but I'm guessing if I have the situation, others may have the same situation. So if we have to move to let's say level 2, so 10 through 12 would be hybrid. My senior is driving my freshman to school, so I didn't sign up for busing. So will there be any alternative for families to arrange for different transportation?
We'll make busing, and we should be able to make busing available, because if we're only taking half of our 10th through 12th graders that we normally would count on taking, we should be able to make those accommodations.
And is there maybe a communication path for that if parents didn't sign their children up at first, but because we're moving to a hybrid model, then we maybe need to, because that might switch routes too. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's possible.
Here's the problem is we actually have the opposite issue, where we have the vast majority of parents signing up, even if they don't need it, just in case they might.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes in middle school, high school, you may have some routes that you're assigning essentially 90 kids to a route, knowing that it's been our past experience, 40 typically ride that route. But if you only assign 45 to that route, then you're also going to have like 20, starting to ride. And so, so we've actually, we've actually had the other issue. It's been the other way. I mean, thank you for saying you don't need it and putting it in there. But yeah, we would make a communication available. And you understand, we're still trying to work through the transportation piece as we're trying to kind of nail down exactly what people want, and what they're planning on doing. And it's the challenge we have every year. It's, I don't know if I might need it 1 or 2 days. And so I'm going to sign up for it. And then here we are trying to budget for it and everything like that. And then they don't either ever end up using it. And then the other piece that we don't know is, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit, is what happens with fall athletics. If we don't all of a sudden have fall athletics, it changes our afternoon bus patterns. We know that it happens on Wednesdays when middle school doesn't run, athletics, and more kids ride the buses on Wednesdays and things like that. So we absolutely try to find a way to make sure, and that's sometimes what that extra 2 days gets us, is we are ensured that we can handle those requests. And if not, make an adjustment to make sure we can get kids picked up and brought back.
Thank you.
Yep. Jerry?
One comment. When you said it would take a lot to get from the 0 to 10 to the 11 to 20, that would be a significant event. That may well be schools reopening. So I mean, we need to be
absolutely
fully prepared for this to immediately be our situation.
Yeah, I mean, so we can immediately be into this, a couple layers into it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And and what it doesn't take a whole lot to go from like 10 to 11. The bigger issue is, because we're kind of bouncing around those two, areas, it would be like all of a sudden to go from like where we're at now to 21 to 30. I mean, that's, you'd need a lot of new cases, something that we have not seen at all in St. Croix County yet. And again, it could be that schools are open. Now, one of the things I will say as we look at this, and Dave, to put you on the spot, but it ties into our conversation as it relates to summer school and the number of kids that we've had involved in programming face-to-face in July. Not that necessarily the history is predictor of the future, but Dave, if you could talk a little bit about the number of kids we've had in face-to-face programming this summer.
Yeah, you bet. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, good. So at the elementary level, we had approximately 700 elementary students involved in summer school at some level. Some of that actually took place at the middle school, summer swim. And then an additional, and correct me if I'm wrong with the number, Tracy, but I have 182 additional elementary school age care students. Knowing that there is some crossover between those, they're not necessarily all unique students, especially between school age care and summer school. But there are some that are unique students in that count as well. about another 274 at the middle school, and about 629 at the high school. So we had a total, including school age care, of just under 1,800 students involved in summer programming over the summer. And as Nick said, obviously, you know, everything is changing so quickly, so there are a lot of questions, but it really provided a nice opportunity to field some of the questions and refine some of our practices when we're dealing with, you know, essentially just under a third of our total student population. So turned out to be a very helpful experience.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Dave, Carrie again. And what were those class sizes capped at?
12 was the typical class for what I say typical, depending on the size of the space. So like for PE, if it's going to be outdoors, the numbers were higher, but for a typical classroom experience, we capped it at 12.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Sue.
Yes, how likely, I guess I was thinking we would be making the changes sequentially, like 1, 2, 3, 4. But how likely is it that we might expect a quantum leap between 1 and 3 or something?
You know, I don't know, and nobody really does know. You know, we've been looking at data from overseas and school districts and countries that have opened up with schools. Obviously, the more mitigation that we can do, you know, the better off we are. You know, and continue to work on those things. The summer school programming, again, it doesn't necessarily mirror what we're doing in a regular day-to-day. However, it was our first large scale starting to bring groups of people together in the district. We did run our contact days for athletics in July. You know, the regular leap program also, and I think Dave touched on that, but I think it's some of the stuff, you know, we're going to have to kind of see. It's interesting as you do read the cases in the news, as you do look at some of these things, and if you can peel through the headline and dig into what's going on, you do see different things that are happening. You know, you see like the big outbreak in Missouri at the overnight camp. You know, it was interesting that about the last paragraph in the article, they talked about, you know, however, there's been a lot of overnight camps that have operated over the summer that haven't had those kind of outbreaks. However, this camp did a lot of singing and chanting and close contact stuff, more so than potentially other camps. Now, is that the deciding factor? We don't know, but I mean, that's one of the challenges that we're running into with some of this stuff is we don't know 100%. I mean, we don't know. And like I said, it could be that by September 2nd, we're making a decision having to kick into a partial hybrid that following Monday, or we're having to potentially make it a couple weeks and then we have to go into a partial hybrid as we look at it. You know, we've had experts tell us on both sides it's going to get worse before it gets better. You know, wait till influenza season comes. You know, it could be much worse. We've heard from other people have said influenza actually might be down this year because we're taking more measures than we've ever taken before to reduce the spread of airborne illness, whether it be the mask or potentially more vaccines for influenza. So some of the stuff we don't know. We're not 100% sure on because we know that we have sports programs that have operated all summer long with very close contacts and been all right. And we know we have other sports programs that have operated and they've had issues. You know, I think that's why it's just not as clear cut as everybody would like to think it is. I mean, and so, you know, as we look at this, as we look at our belief statements, which is if we can try to provide opportunities for kids to the best of our ability, let's try to do that. If that means we get, you know, more face-to-face instruction, more opportunities, you know, that's kind of where we're pushing. I mean, I think if you were to look at our numbers back in when we did close the buildings, our numbers are much higher now than they were then. However, what we don't know is, are our numbers better then because we did what we did, with the shelter in place, closing the buildings? Or would our numbers have been even higher than had there been adequate testing at the time? So, I mean, that's the problem. There's a lot of unknowns as to what it looks like. Go ahead, Sue.
Just one follow-up point. I've become extremely aware of the fact that the reason we are here in this struggle, creating this matrix and metric and trying to figure out how to best serve our kids and our staff and especially our teachers, and trying to mitigate as many situations as we can for purposes of safety and so on. It's been dropped on every school district to do this individually, to bivouac in place, because we've not had some kind of national strategic plan. And you just mentioned the testing and so on. So I guess we find ourselves having to try to find our own way here. We're foraging, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's important to be reminded that the struggle here has fallen into our lap. We're not happy about it. But I think that I think that this is a direction. This is a place to start in person. And then most of you maybe never drove a manual drive car, but you go first, second, third, you can go back down to second, and there's some fluidity and flexibility in this. Just wanted to say that.
Hey, go ahead, Rob.
You were talking about the summer camp and the singing at this one camp that potentially.
Oh.
Thanks. So you're talking about the summer camp that had the singing that potentially was the cause of some of that additional spread that perhaps other camps didn't experience, which reminded me a bit of our wonderful choir and band programs. Certainly, we have those children who participate excited to get back into their those classrooms. And so what conversations or what planning have we had to protect those choir kids, those band kids, to make sure that we don't have something similar to this summer camp?
Absolutely. I mean, we've had multiple conversations with different music staff. Now, you will have some music staff that weren't involved in those conversations, but we have engaged staff at all levels. I know, on Friday, for example, we had met with, we were talking about the Home for the Holiday concert, and we were talking about concerts and whether or not we could do these things. And basically the decision to be coming out is that, right now until at least January 1st, there would be no public concerts for the Hudson School District. We just can't do it. And then, having a conversation with Mr. Hayes, talking about, okay, you have these large ensembles of 100 kids, 120 kids in choir. How can you safely have them sing as a group, and what does that look like? And it really looks more like potentially splitting kids up and moving actually away from our individual lessons, but splitting our large ensembles up into two, and then utilizing the auditorium and the auditorium seating so that we can keep kids, 10, 15 feet apart. I don't know what exactly it comes out to be, so that they can, they have half as many kids singing there. The other half of the kids at that same time are with the other choir instructor that are utilizing, it's more music theory. It's more, it's not singing. It's going to be more instructional based and not as much singing. I will tell you that our music programs will not look normal this year. And the music staff knows that. I know Dave has been meeting with, and the curricular team's been meeting with elementary music staff, middle school music staff, and looking at our elementary programming being more rhythmic and instrumental. So when they're coming in and working with kids, it's not going to be about coming in and singing and having concerts. It's going to be more instrumental, more rhythmic, and having those conversations. So it will absolutely look different. It's the same thing with athletics and whether or not we're even able to have them or not. And that's a conversation coming up here in a little bit. Go ahead, Bruce.
Just a couple other quick questions. So freshman orientation this year, is there discussion around that? Because, I've got a incoming freshman. I don't think that he's really even been in the building yet. So is there a plan for that and communication for that, for kids to see the school, for freshmen to see the school before school starts?
Yeah, and I believe Dave was in those meetings because we've had meetings about orientations and transition programs. So Dave, if you want to talk a little bit about freshman orientation.
Yep, you bet. And as you said, Nick, this would apply to most of the other sort of orientation meetings we do. I think freshman orientation being one of the most important, along with the sixth grade orientation. Obviously, that's a massive transition. So looking at still holding that with pretty significant mitigation strategies in place. Looking at splitting so part of the reduction in the total volume is handled through the advisors taking the smaller groups of kids to different spaces, but then also splitting that into multiple cohorts and then having paths throughout the building so we don't have people crossing. And then the numbers that we would have with families or family members could be accommodated still in the auditorium.
Thank you. Good information there. Thank you. I just want to make sure our parents are hearing about that. It might even be good to share anything on, and I will openly admit my wife is much better at reading all the emails than I. So maybe it's been there, but I did ask her about it, and I don't think she had seen anything on it either.
We actually
so.
sent it to you directly, certified mail, Bruce, but that's okay.
One other quick question. Sorry, Bob. So just, in regards to kind of the social distancing aspect for students in classrooms, have we gone through and looked at like how many kids will be in a class? And then on top of that, since, we're already mid-August, or close to mid-August, have we gone through the buildings, or like has Jim gone through the buildings, figured out seating arrangements in classes? I know with our new high school, it does open up opportunities for additional spaces to be used for learning for, a number of our classroom settings. So could you maybe just talk a little bit about the preparedness in terms of understanding, if we're going to have 20 kids in one classroom, or do we get up to 25? What does that do for us in certain classroom settings for distancing? Just curious what sort of preparedness has gone into that.
Nick, could I actually pipe in, because then you can answer two questions at once, because my question was going to be similar, and that I think like many of you, I'm hearing from a lot of parents who are saying, I'm really pleased that we're doing the masking, but it's the masking paired with the social distancing. And how can we do that? I know someone said, if you've got 28 kids in an elementary classroom, 2 feet is the best you can do between desks, even if you take everything else out. And so if you could speak a little bit to conversations we've had about kind of where have we landed? What are we okay with? What creative strategies are we thinking about to help create some space? Thanks.
So I guess I would always caution people when people are out there on Facebook or out there on social media trying to do blanket statements as to where we can and can't social distance, because classrooms do vary in size. There is no way for us to guarantee with 100% certainty that we can keep 6 feet between every kid all day long in any classroom. Some classrooms lend themselves better to that than others. As Dave has talked with different people, and I've heard him say, so I'll steal one of his lines, is 3 feet's better than 2, 4 feet's better than 3, and 5's better than 4. And we're trying to push out as wide as we possibly can. To get as much social distancing as we possibly can in classrooms, knowing that it very well might not be possible. Where we have situations where kids are sitting at tables and that's their primary seating assignment, we are working to secure dividers for those to be able to have, I guess they're called sneeze guard for lack of a better term. We have ordered and have already had delivered quite a bit of the guards as it relates to use in the cafeteria. We are approaching the $150,000 mark in plexiglass as we are looking at providing these items and it's growing. As far as passing times go and recesses and things like that, our passing times both at the middle school and at the high school. The middle school is going to be doing more staggered passing times because their classes are a little bit more pure than the high school classes like 8th grade, 6th grade, and 7th grade. And they'll be working to do that along with potentially one-way hallways. So everybody's going in the same direction. It's the same thing at the high school. They're working on the maps to change student circulation and student flow, force students kind of into areas that are not heavily used to start to open up areas that are high trafficked areas. You know, obviously the last thing we want is to have really, really crowded situations. However, we do know that, you know, sometimes that does happen and that, you know, we're trying to work to alleviate that. So there will be some one-way hallways and some traffic flow patterns, and that communication is coming out from the high school as they continue to evaluate that. Our lunch cafeterias, as it relates to social distancing, we are going to be running them at basically 50% of their seating capacity. So at the high school, it means we're opening up what's called the fish bowl that typically is not open to lunch. It adds about another, 200 or 300 seats to the lunchroom. That I think the lunchroom capacity, you know, at the high school is right around 1,100 seats, and we, you know, running about 550 is what we would anticipate at that each lunch as we work through there. At the elementaries, we're stretching the lunches out further so that they have less overlap as they come and go. Also working with staff to, as they're lining up for lunch, how do you create the social distancing in the hallways? We're putting reminders on the floors, directional arrows, all of those different components. So are we doing everything we feel like we can to try to social distance? Some people say you're not doing everything because you could go hybrid and that would give you more space. And that very well could be the case. But right now, you know, we're still believing that, you know, face-to-face is our best route as of right now. And even what's interesting is if we drop and we just follow the Minnesota model and we take all the building stuff out of here, and we drop to 8 or 9 cases per 10,000, even the Minnesota model says that's K-12 face-to-face. That's not hybrid. And so what's really hard sometimes is we have some people that are saying, you're not doing enough to follow the Minnesota model. But then if we follow the Minnesota model, if that doesn't correspond with what they want, which is hybrid in certain places, well, then now, no, don't follow the Minnesota model, follow what I want. And so it is a challenge. And so this is our best shot at it based on what Minnesota is doing, trying to look at our building data, trying to talk with our county public health. Now, there is rumor that the state of Wisconsin is going to come out with additional guidance over the next 3 or 4 days. You know, it's great timing because it's only the middle of August and we're supposed to start school in 15 days, but now all of a sudden they're going to decide to provide some guidance as to what we should be looking at. If their guidance is more restrictive than what we're thinking with the metric, I think we will meet again and reevaluate and look at that. And we may need to make adjustments and changes, you know, to the metric. And I think the thing is that with everything that we've talked about in the last few meetings, everything COVID related is nothing is carved in stone, and that it can be changed and it can be adjusted. And we have to be able to move and be more agile as we work through it. I think the other thing is although, yes, it looks like we are K-12 face-to-face in 11 to 20 cases, Minnesota's model at 0 to 10, regardless basically of what's happening in the building, their 0 to 10 is face-to-face. And so it's easy to look at the top and say, oh, we're being a little bit more laxed than the Minnesota model because 11 to 20, we're still face-to-face K-12. However, in 0 to 10, there are situations where in the county, we'd be 0 to 10, that we would be more restrictive than what the Minnesota model is. And so it was trying to find somewhat of a balance as we work through this. We definitely take it very serious. And absolutely, it is an absolute real and serious health situation for a lot of people. But as we look at this, as we do listen to the CDC guidance, as we do listen to the experts, as we do listen to the American Association of Pediatrics and Dr. Redfield at the CDC and Dr. Fauci and all of these different folks, we also have to keep in mind that safer at home and sheltering at home is not always safer at home for everybody. It is safer at home for some people, but not everybody, because home is not always safer than being in the building. And it is something that we weigh, and it does weigh in our mind. It does bother me that when I talk to the chief of police, he tells me that domestic calls are up 200%. However, child abuse reports in the state of Wisconsin are down 50%. What does that tell you? It's not necessarily always safer at home for every kid. And it is trying to look at all kids and try to look at this situation. And this really is our best attempt at it. We know that kids are not getting the mental health services they need when we're not open. Although we try to do it virtually. We know it's not the same. We know that kids aren't getting the same level of care. We know that kids are not, and not all kids, but we know that there are kids that aren't getting the same level of food. We know that there are kids that are in environments that are more challenging and more difficult. And that's why, we do want to get back, because we are looking at the whole kid. And, we do give the option for parents that do not feel comfortable sending their kids to keep their kids home and go completely virtual. And they have that option. But we also give the option for those parents that want to send their kids 5 days a week, the option to do that. And it is really hard because you're trying to be all things to all people. And in a purely looking at this from a how do we reduce the impact related to COVID, closing and going hybrid obviously makes the most sense. However, there are costs associated with that. And I'm not talking dollars. I'm talking about real cost to kids and long-term impact on them. And that's the challenge. We don't get the luxury of being able to say, you can stop this disease if everybody just does this thing. It's at what cost? Because there are other costs. And I think that's something people have to consider. Bob, you had something for me?
Yeah, I was just wondering how with the closure metric, how contact tracing fits in with how comfortable are we with county health as far as if we do have some positive cases, how aggressively they go after, how fast? I know I had a COVID test that took 6 days. I had a COVID test I paid for out of my pocket. It took 24 hours. So how are we set up for fast tests?
So you have two different questions there, because you have the how long does it take to get positive tests, and then the other question is how is the county doing on contact tracing? Because they're not necessarily tied together. They're actually exclusive of one another, because what happens is what we have found is that when the county has been notified of positive cases, the contact tracing is happening very quickly. And I think they are hitting their goal of within 24 hours when they are being made aware of a positive case. However, as you alluded to, how long it takes for people to get positive results back has varied everywhere from, I know of people that have told me they've got them back within hours to other people that have said it took me 17 days. And, so that creates a huge challenge for us. I can tell you that we did have a positive case that happened to be a student related in our Raider Elite program. Within the 24 hours of the county being notified, they had the close contacts called and they were in seclusion. Now, the thing is the county was delayed in getting that information. And, and that's something that we keep pushing on, but it's, again, outside of our control. But I would say when they find out, they have been doing a good job of making the close contacts. The other piece is when they call us and ask for names or addresses or contact information, we provide that. We don't determine who the close contact is. That's the county's job to do that. However, if they say, I need to know, who sits next to Carrie in her third grade classroom, we can say, here's the seating chart. This is where Carrie sits. And they'll say, okay, I need contact information of Rob and Ryan and Bob and Sue, and then they make that determination based on that. And so that's what we're working is the exchange of information, but we're not actually making the determination on what is a close contact.
Nick?
Yep.
So of the roughly 5,600 students that we have, how many have committed to virtual so far this year?
Dave, do you have the numbers up as it relates to where we're sitting with our virtual versus in person as of right now, as we're working
Yep,
through the polls?
absolutely. Yeah. So as of right now, we've had 3,754 responses to the survey. Of those, 3,057 have opted for the onsite or in person. That equates to about 81.4%. And then a combined between the intermittent and year long, which got a little bit confusing, but I think people have figured it out. A total of just over 13% that are opting for the individual distance learning. And there's an additional 5.2% that fall in the other category. Even though it's an other category, it seems most of them are sort of restating their original assertion, but then are adding some comments. But also within the others would be open enrollment out to a different district, homeschool, other options that they would take. So that number is 5.2, but in terms of actual other options, it's tracking closer to about 2.5%.
So we have more than 700 kids that have opted for virtual.
Did you say 700 kids have opted for virtual at this
No,
point? Dave?
right now it would be just over 500.
Just over 500.
Yep. Because it's of the total number that we have in. So 362 have opted for the intermittent, while 141 have committed to year-long distance learning.
Go ahead.
Nick, question, or maybe Dave, it's for you. I know there's concern about the burden on teachers on this teaching kids in your classroom at the same time you're teaching kids out of your classroom, and then the work that happens around that to support both sets of kids. I know some districts have looked at, I think River Falls is going this route, looked at not having those kids be live in the classroom, but actually creating classrooms for those kids so that they have a virtual learning environment with other kids who are virtual. Have we talked about that? And can you just talk a little bit about kind of why we've landed where we've landed?
I mean, I can start from the instructional standpoint, and there's a lot to your question. There's a lot of variables in there that you bring up, and it's a complex question. But instructionally speaking, we truly feel that the individual distance learning model long-term will be easier for teachers to administer because they're planning primarily one lesson with minor modifications for the students that are synchronously connected to the classroom in real time. As soon as you go asynchronous, by the very nature of an asynchronous model, you have to plan two separate experiences. One for the students you're in front of, one for the students that are virtual. And then obviously, if you created separate virtual sections, then we have a staffing issue where we'd have to hire many, many teachers to accommodate both a virtual section that is live with a on-site section.
So one of the challenges is, although 500 sounds like a lot of kids, and it is, it's rarely is it enough in any one grade level, especially at the elementary, where you could reduce a section. So you might have 3 or 4 kids here, 3 or 4 kids there. And it's similar to when we talk about, building, the amount of kids in a building and why are we only running at 80% capacity versus 100% or whatever it is. And so what happens is, okay, if all of a sudden we create this virtual experience for these kids, we can't just cut sections of face-to-face teachers, because if we pull 5 third graders out of Hudson Prairie, that doesn't necessarily allow us to reduce a section at Hudson Prairie of 3rd grade. And so what ends up happening is, and you say, well, couldn't you take the 5 from Hudson Prairie and the 6 from Rivercrest and do all, and you absolutely could, but you might be looking at needing essentially 12 to 15 additional full-time teachers to teach the virtual side of things, because there's nobody, because we can't reduce number of sections, we wouldn't want to, and all of a sudden drive the numbers way up. And so then all of a sudden who teaches these virtual onlys. And if you have a small amount, I mean, if you only have a couple kids, or you have, 100 and some kids total, and you're going to say, well, we're going to hire 2 or 3 teachers, and they should be able to handle kind of like the one room schoolhouse model where they might handle multiple grades and do those things. That works to some extent, but it just depends on scale. And as we look at it, and then I think the other piece is, what do we do for like single section classes, especially specialty classes at the high school? If you're in AP Calc, or if you're in welding, or you're in these specialty classes, how do we do that? We don't have enough kids not taking face-to-face where we could say, okay, one of our tech ed teachers is only going to do virtual support, or one of our Spanish teachers is going to do only online Spanish, and the rest of the kids are automatically going to get pushed into the other teacher's classes. I mean, I don't know, as we're watching it, I mean, that's one of the big challenges. Dave, is that kind of what I've heard you say as you've kind of looked at the analysis?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, your analysis of the numbers is spot on. I mean, we're talking on average, even at the high school, we have about 170 total students that have opted for individual distance learning. So we're talking less than 40 per grade level. And when you start to spread that across all of the different classes that they would be taking, it would be very difficult to schedule around that. I'll take another example at our largest elementary of Hudson Prairie, talking 37 total students that have at this point, or families rather, that have elected for individual distance learning. So, and I think this is sort of the common refrain. There is no perfect model. So we're, once we locked in on the direction that we're taking, we're trying to do our best to support that model. And as Nick said, knowing that we may need to change quickly. We can't be so confident in any one model that we lock ourselves in and lose sight of the fact that there may be better ideas out there.
So, and one of the things that Dave's going to spend some time talking about in a little bit in the meeting is going to be that he's going to describe what is that distance learning look like. And there are a lot of misconceptions out there of what the expectation is. There's a lot of misconceptions out there as to the amount of hours kids are going to spend on screen time, or the amount of time teachers are going to be lecturing to kids and things like that. And so Dave will be working through that in that part of the meeting. I think, kind of the last, piece with COVID update, Andrea, was there something that you had? I know Jamie had said that you were wanting to talk at one point, and I didn't see it because it was a screen share.
I think I might have hit the wrong button. I was trying to figure out if I was looking at the right screen. So maybe I just hit the wrong button. Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. And so, essentially what we would do is we would, going back to the metric and the blueprint and everything, we would implement the metric into our blueprint with the understanding, knowing that it very well could change. It could change if all of a sudden 3 days from now, the state comes out with different guidelines, and we're gonna have to meet, and we may have to call a special meeting with the board and say, hey, we gotta draw some more stuff up. We're gonna do that. When we started down this path, we were under the direction that the state was not going to provide us with anything. And what we kept hearing from both staff, from parents, was, what is it that you're going to utilize in order to make your decisions? The other piece is what we don't have at this point, it may not be ours to determine, is, one of the things people ask, at what point do you no longer expect masks to be required? What do the numbers have to look like? At what point, if the governor's order expires, will you still require masks? Well, I mean, right now we're saying yes. We don't know what it looks like, but our original mask mandate was, if kids could be 6 feet apart, they could have a mask break. The governor's order doesn't allow that, hence why we're all in mask right now. And so some of those metrics that, people ask, when are you going to make a decision? We don't have the answer to that yet. And we're just trying to be upfront with people. We don't know. We don't have the answer. We would anticipate that that's going to come from public health and from the state, but I will tell you that we were anticipating that quite a bit this summer, and a lot of it never came. And so that's why we started to look across the river at different models. And the other thing you have to keep in mind, Minnesota is a totally different state. They have totally different rules. And what their legislature may or may not do, or governor may or may not do as it relates to funding, as it relates to requirements and things like that is different than what we're tied to in Wisconsin. Although they're great to look at when we need some of this stuff, we just have to keep that in mind. The other thing I think that's interesting is as you look at where our communities are and what communities are wanting. I think when I talked to River Falls, at one point they were saying 51% of their parents were going to send their kids back. Okay, that's a much different number than 82%. And then as I, had talked to the districts to the north, it was either Somerset or Richmond, they were talking in the upper 90s. What their survey results were. And it's almost like you have this whole gamut within about 40 miles, and I can tell you right now, as we sit, and it could absolutely change tomorrow or by the end of tonight, and I don't know their meeting, is the districts that I'm aware of in St. Croix County are all planning on going K-12 5 days a week. The only district that I'm aware of that is close to us on this side of the river that is not planning on going 5 days a week K-12 is River Falls, where they are looking at doing a hybrid model for the secondary. But the other districts, New Richmond, Somerset, St. Croix Central, Baldwin, Woodville, Glenwood City, all of them, to the best of my knowledge, St. Croix Falls are planning on going
And
5
Nick,
days a week.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall the River Falls, you said was 51% of the parents wanted the 5 days.
Yeah, I believe that's what I was told. And again,
And their school board vote was 4-3, kind of reflected that split in the community then.
they did have it. Yeah, they did have a split on it. And when I talked to Jamie, it wasn't necessarily that 3 wanted 100%. I mean, he said, 1 or 2 of the 3 might have wanted completely virtual, so.
Okay.
They would have.
The last point, I know we want to get to, we got more reports before we even get to our action items, but what impact, if any, would WIA, is supposed to come out with something here in the next 72 hours or so?
Yeah, I mean, so from what I understand, DHS, Department of Human Services or Health Services for state of Wisconsin is going to opine on athletics. I mean, they're going to give their opinion on what they think we should do. And again, I just gotten an email today that said, hey, just be ready in the next 3 or 4 or 5 days. There could be a metric coming out, a guidance from the state metric as it relates to how to deal with cases in schools. Also, they believe within the next 3 or 4 days, the Department of Human Services is going to make their opinion known on athletics. And also in the next few days, they're also going to look at, what are additional protocols school districts can implement and do. So again, it's this, a lot of this can change. It's very fluid.
Okay, anything more yet on the COVID? Otherwise, moving on to the TAC report.
Yep, and I'm going to turn that over to Andrea because TAC, which is the Teacher Advisory Committee, is really Andrea's committee. She heads that up, although the cabinet team, myself sit on it, but I'll let her talk through and kind of give an update.
Sure, definitely. And so just so you guys know too, I mean, we have been meeting, we typically meet about 2-3 times a school year. Since COVID has occurred, we have been meeting much more frequently. So we met March 11th, right before we shut down, and then April 20th, July 23rd, and August 4th. So far. And I think that's the key, is that it's been a ongoing conversation. There was a bit of a lull there for a period of time when there were some unknowns between April and July, but once the board set out the blueprint for returning, then that's when we got the group back together. I think a very spirited discussion, which is why I love TAC, and we pick people to be on TAC. We have about 25 people. We pick people to be on TAC that are vocal, that will share their opinions, that have a lot of feedback to give, because that's what we want as we're having these tough discussions. And I think that first one on July 23rd was the full length of what we allotted for, I think 4 hours and then some, which we expect. And from that, we learned we didn't even cover all the agenda items. So from there, we had set up this August 4th meeting, and then we've already been talking about having another opportunity for a meeting so that we can continue to engage and get feedback. Their conversations with us have directly impacted the directions that we've been going. Because again, they're kind of our front line of, okay, this is what we're looking at. This is what's the feedback from the staff? What concerns are you hearing? So that we can have a robust conversation and collaboration as a group. So I'm hopeful that it will continue going forward with the positive intentions of everybody. Yes, it's a tough time. It's a challenging time, but the intentions of everybody is to do what's best for kids. And so how do we, even if we disagree as to the methods, how do we agree that that's, and we all do agree that that's what we're shooting for, is we want to be there for the kids. And I look forward to future meetings with this group because I think it is great. I think it's a great vehicle. I think it's really important that we maintain its integrity going forward because we need to have that teacher voice prominent as we're going forward.
Questions for Andrea? Yes, Heather.
Andrea, I'm glad to hear that hopefully the teachers feel too that their feedback has directly impacted our planning. If you had to summarize as a group what the TAC has really prioritized or where they're most asking for considerations, are there a couple areas that they're most vocal about that you could share?
Definitely, and I think the first hurdle that we had to cross, where there was a lot of discussion leading up to that TAC meeting on July 23rd, was the feeling of that they weren't involved in that initial blueprint, right? We had to have some tough conversations about the timeline that led to the blueprint. And then we had to talk about, okay, so how do we go forward knowing that we may disagree on the fact that we're coming back 5 days in person, but how do we put supports in place to go in that direction now that that's the action that has been taken by the board? And so I think that that's probably one of the conversations, certainly a lively conversation. I think that some of the biggest input we got and concerns of the teachers was that, first of all, was simply coming back. And then also what PPE is available, right? Like those type of conversations, like what kind of precautions or mitigation strategies are we putting into place to support our staff and our students? What happens with teachers who are scared to come back? What happens with, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about the last couple months of the board too, what happens to all these situations? We're in a time where it's uncertain in a way that most people are not comfortable with change or uncertainty. And so I think we just have tried to be responsive to all the different issues. Some things that have grown out of the TAC conversation, for example, is the virtual learning option of virtual teaching option if they're quarantined. That kind of developed through TAC. Another thing that developed through TAC is the potential, which I know we're going to be discussing later too, is the school age care option potentially as an option. Hearing the concerns and the stress, given some of the people's realities, we want to be responsive to that. And so those are some of the big pieces, I think, most recently that we've been working on addressing.
Nick.
Rob,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Andrea, quick question. With regards to school age care for our teachers and staff, should we talk about that now, or is that something we'll be talking about later on in the agenda?
No, we can talk about it now.
Oh, okay. I know that we're exploring options of, because we heard that concern, right? We heard the concern of what if Hudson goes virtual. And I think in the back of my head too, since we've heard that Minnesota is most likely, I mean, most schools are not going back in person. I did a data mine right away and said 88 staff members live in Minnesota. So then we start problem solving. So I think then we start looking at, okay, how can we set this up? What are our limitations in terms of space? What are our limitations in terms of funding? And that's where we really need to look and get guidance from the board is it is a cost to offer the care, and under what conditions would we offer that care? And how do we move forward with this, knowing there's all these different competing interests? And it's something different that we're doing, that we're exploring now as compared to last April when we're still having, school age care and nutrition services employees work. So from an equity perspective, from a cost benefit, and also hearing the staff members, it's a significant stressor for them to consider this at this time. Would like to talk to the board about what they're comfortable with as we're moving forward in that too. It's a big issue.
So, I'm glad Rob brought it up. I mean, right now, what we're leaning towards, because this does come up and it came up in TAC, it's come up from staff is, what do I do with my kids when they don't have school and you're expecting me to work? And it is a challenge, and it's been a challenge for everybody up to this point that has been required to go back to work. And schools have been closed or summer camps have been closed and things like that. And so, and we have remind the board that we did bring back custodians, our custodial staff in April, without an offer of childcare. We did bring back our office staff at the end of May without an offer of childcare. And we did bring back our school age care staff in July, without an offer of childcare. And they did come, and we did lose some staff as well. As we look at this, as we think about our recommendations and what we can do, one of the things that we originally started off with was, hey, we would open up our school age care, childcare for children of our staff, that they could pay to utilize that care, like nurses and other tier 1 essential workers have been doing since we kept that open since March. And we did get a lot of pushback on that. I think you guys have gotten a lot of emails on that and things like that, or at least several emails, because that rate is around $31 a day, is about where we're at. And so, obviously, if you have multiple kids that need that care, that can get to be expensive. Also, originally we were thinking it would only be available once we close buildings. We have been working with building principals to look and see, okay, could we free up 1 or 2 rooms at the elementary level? Excuse me, my face is itching with this mask on. Could we free up, several rooms at the elementary level so that we could provide potentially care options for our staff that live outside the district, whose districts have already said they're not going back full time with kids. And so would that option, would we, if they wanted to bring their kids essentially and put them in that care, and I believe we can do that. And Tracy's been working on that with the building principals, and at least we just started that conversation today. With that being said, there's a cost. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There is a cost to it. And the question to the board is, how much of that cost does the district want to absorb versus how much of that cost would we like to continue to pass on to staff members that may be utilizing it, may have been utilizing it already. And so,
Well, but you're not, that's more of a rhetorical question. You're not expecting to get input tonight from school board members on that. You said you started the conversation today, so you'd have some kind of recommendation for us, maybe for our next meeting on August 24.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're coming. Our recommendation is that there would be some type of reduction in cost, and depending on what your comfort level would be. And I guess, if the board, it's not necessarily an action item, but if the board is giving general feedback that, yes, we want you to pursue that, to the best of your ability or what that looks like, then we can start to run those numbers for you. We can tell you that if we need to absorb that cost, what potentially it would mean to like a Fund 80. And what would you guys have to do to a Fund 80 levy or general fund dollars that you would have to move over to Fund 80? Or, what we could potentially believe we could offset with those folks not needing to take the EFMLA leave and us having to hire a sub in lieu of that. And so, which could be very much offsetting to those things. And so, we've kind of gone full circle in not a tremendous amount of time, where we've gone basically from, no, we think the equitable thing would be, because we've been charging employees up to this point and other folks to continue to do that. However, if we change gears on this, because teachers are now involved, that we would offer that same discount or that same rate to any of our employees that it would impact related to school age care. And it would be from kindergarten to fifth grade age kids. It would not be, early childhood. It would not be 4K. It would not be sixth, seventh, or eighth graders. It would basically be kindergarten to fifth grade. And so I guess what I would like is a little bit of feedback or some conversation about what are your thoughts on that?
Well, anyone opposed to that? Getting some kind of reduction?
So I'm not opposed to it. I also made the mention that, I think for those teachers that have to teach in a classroom, I don't think it's terrible for them to have their kids in the classroom while they're teaching. That's my own personal opinion on that. If they were teaching from their house, they also would have those children, at home. So that may be a more controlled environment where they have set structured hours where they're going to be doing, instruction. But they will have times where they could also, work with their children, but it gives them a space where, they're still, in a family pod, if you will, and in a classroom. So I think there are some other ways to think about it, as opposed to just, saying, we need you in this building, we need you teaching, and you can't have your kids in that classroom with you, because we're doing our best to work around with this. And I think that would be one other alternative to at least consider or discuss as a cabinet team, because it's merely a recommendation.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, and I think the issue, and I could be wrong, might be more if we had a teacher at the middle school or at the high school, and they live in the district, then they happen to have kids at the elementary level, where they, it's a hybrid, they're teaching at the high school, and, unfortunately their kids, maybe their building got shut down for some reason. And they're, so I think it's something more along those lines than their kids in their own building or what have you.
Well, I just so you understand, I mean, if we were to allow that option, it wouldn't be when we still have kids in the building, as far as letting them have them in their room. So like they wouldn't, if you're teaching high school, we wouldn't have you bring your first grader into your high school room with you. It would be, I think what I'm hearing Bruce say is, if we go 100% virtual and teachers are required to be in the rooms, potentially would we allow kids to come with them?
Correct.
Yep. Go ahead, Heather.
Well, I mean, to that point, I'm still a little bit confused about why, if we go 100% virtual, we would require teachers to teach from their classrooms. I guess maybe there are some cases where you need the materials in your classroom, but I would hope there would be flexibility there. But going to the question about, do we, as an innovative response to this pandemic, kind of offer a new and short-term benefit, if you will, which is some subsidized care for kids? I think that makes a lot of sense. I would fully support coming back to us with some information on the cost of that. I think, and also to think not only about the offset for not having to be paying EFMLA or whatever, but also just the instructional value. I mean, that our learners are going to be better served if we keep those regular teachers in their classrooms than if they're on FMLA and we're bringing in substitute teachers to teach those classes. I mean, so that's not a money value, but I think that's another, I guess, a cost to our kids if we go that route, if their instruction is not coming from the teacher who's best trained to be teaching that classroom. So yes, I would support looking into that.
Absolutely. And I think that was the big push of why we were wanting to look at this is we've said from the very get-go that we believe the most difficult thing we'll have with operating schools this year is staff related, as far as keeping our buildings staffed, more than dealing with people that don't want to wear masks, more than dealing with, cleaning more than anything else is trying to make sure that we can maintain staff. And so, one of the things that we could do is put together, work the numbers and put together a proposal of what that would look like. And we might have to potentially call a special board meeting between now and the next meeting in order to have the discussion so that people can plan accordingly. Go ahead, Carrie.
Excuse me. Based on Bruce's speculations about teaching in the classroom, I think these are all interrelated discussions, like the increased pay potentially for substitutes, the need for synchronous learning rather than the teacher doing it. If it's full closure, doing it from home and maybe not real time to best serve their family. But I would just to put it out there, I would be fully supportive of teachers paying zero for child care. When in reality, this is hazardous pay, really. And if we're willing to offer, this hazardous duty pay to subs, I certainly think we'd want to offer that to the teachers who are there 5 days a week.
Well, and just a couple clarifying points. The pay increase for subs is not because of hazardous duty. It's to try to attract more subs in the sub pool. Yeah. And then I guess the other piece is, as we look at this, would you like us to look at it for all staff members in the district? Or are you only wanting us to look at subsidizing childcare for teaching staff members?
I don't know that you can single out employees. I'd say it'd be pretty tough to.
I mean, we can legally, we can. I mean, you could actually say this teacher can have it and this teacher can't.
Sure.
However, as of right now, up to this point, we have said to all of our other employees, there is no free care, and we're expecting you to be at work.
Right.
And so understand that our recommendation that if we come back to you with a free care option for all employees, it is in an effort to keep our buildings open and to keep instruction going. And that's the primary purpose, because we want the actual teacher in front of their kids, as we look at this, because what I don't want to have happen is to have our support staff say, why is it that when teachers ask for this, they have free care, but we've been working in this district as well, and we were not offered free care? And we have a lot of support staff that have been working in the district for the last 4 months, 3 months.
Well,
And I think it's in an effort to keep the buildings open, because if our teachers aren't here, we can't keep the buildings open. We can't keep instructing kids. They are, and same with our support staff, but I mean, they are a vital piece, even in the virtual setting. There's, as far as we need them available and potentially without having to watch their own kids while they're trying to deliver instruction, because, the at-home thing sounds really good. However, if you have 20 some kids on a Zoom and you have a first grader over here that's your own first grade, how are you able to provide oversight of your own kids and try to manage the kids that you have in front of you? It's almost impossible. And so that was kind of partly why have them at school to deliver the instruction, because the thought was, either way, if you needed childcare, you would probably need childcare whether you were delivering from home or at school. And the thought of having it at school was, that's one more thing we can at least control when it comes to technology, because we know that at least if they're on our technology, it's a stable connection, not necessarily because of anything else. So it's not necessarily, hey, we got to have you here for this. I mean, we could absolutely set up a schedule. It's just the thought was, if I have a first grader at home and I have a third grader at home, it's going to be very difficult for me to help my first and third grader and deal with my 26 fourth graders that I have in my class, or my 28 juniors that I have in my chemistry class at the exact same time. And so that was the thought process behind. It's not as easy as just saying to teachers, hey, watch your kids, we'll let you do it at home. It does become a childcare issue, which I would agree with teach staff. It's just, to what level do you want to subsidize that childcare level.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that these are complex, issues and everything. And that's all the more reason why I think your team ought to be reviewing it and then coming back with a recommendation. But I just see some, topic, trying to keep us on the agenda and not going into what support staff want when we were trying to get a TAC update. So if we could just stick to the TAC update and finish that report and then move on. Yes. Carrie or Rob.
One, if you don't mind, when you're doing your investigation, and perhaps Nick, you already know the answer, maybe Tim does, but is there a way to, at this point, legally reopen up their cafeteria plans?
That'd be a
Flex
question
spending?
it'd be a question for Andrew or Tim.
Yeah, so what there was a federal extension. So for this past year, people have the ability to spend up to incur costs up until December 15th. So we adopted that in our plan, so people have that ability.
So up till September 15th, they can make a change.
I'm sorry, December 15th. If I said, I meant December. Sorry about that. So December 15th last year.
That is to incur costs, but Tim, he's asking to elect to have more taken out.
Correct. For this childcare, if there is
They all of a sudden are starting to see
Okay, got it. Sure. Yeah. So yeah, we'd have to take a look at that. We'd have to look into that and ask. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
I don't think that's something we can unilaterally decide. That's got to be a federal issue, right?
Correct.
Right. It's all IRS. It's all based on IRS code. So we'll have to see. There might be a way to do that.
Carrie, you had a TAC update request?
Yes, to follow up, Andrea, with the no TAC meetings between April and July 23rd, when the decision was made, how the schools would look to reopen, why was there no teacher input during that time?
Well, just to correct you, Carrie, it wasn't that there was no teacher input. There wasn't a TAC meeting. And I was just going to ask that
I thought that's
after.
what she had said, that the TAC was one of the most vocal points that they were upset about, that they hadn't had any input and no voice in how that would look.
I would speak to that being that there were other conversations going on in teaching and learning to see, okay, what would these different models look like? Dave Grambo and his team brought many people in, many teachers in during June and July to work up what this would look like. And so as that was being developed, we didn't schedule a TAC meeting. I mean, it's certainly, looking back at it, there was best of intentions, thinking we had to do that work to understand the parent survey, to understand, I mean, all the different pieces of what we were likely looking at going into this year. But is that something that, to be reflective, I mean, certainly I'm all about getting as much teacher input as possible before making big decisions. And so we could probably do that differently. And I'm not trying to hesitate to say that. I wasn't involved as much on the teaching and learning side of it. So it's hard for me to speak. I just know that there was a lot of work and a lot of teachers were coming in, being engaged in part of that process. So we didn't want to be duplicative of those efforts when there hadn't yet been any direction and decision on what it would look like.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Andrea. I can speak to that a little bit, because as Andrea said, there was a lot of work that was happening in teaching and learning, and we did get a lot of teacher input. But to be fair and completely transparent, that feedback and input we received was more along the lines, if this is the model, what's the best way we can support that model? How can we make this the best it can be? I think as we move forward, and well, let me back up. We focused primarily on meeting with people that were in a specific position to offer feedback related to teaching and learning, curriculum and instruction. So at the high school, it's department chairs. At the middle school level, is their PLC leads. And at the elementary level, it was the committee members that are assigned to each curricular area. And in some cases, there's overlap with TAC. In some cases, there's not. And but again, we came with the model and wanted support on how to implement that model to the best of our ability for the greatest positive impact for as many students as possible. Part of that was just timing. You know, decisions are being made so quickly right now as we're responding to new information. As we move forward, I think we can definitely, well, as an example, we have a hybrid model now on our matrix. we haven't had a great deal of conversation on what that hybrid model would look like. This would be an opportunity for us to reach out and make sure that we are getting as much teacher feedback as possible.
And David, how many groups did you have? I recall 44.
Yeah, there were, it started with 44. There was some combination of a few groups. So it turned out to be fewer groups, but more meetings. Some of the meetings, Lisa Scoyne, as an example, the Assistant Director of Teaching and Learning for elementary level, has had several repeat meetings with different groups, going back and saying, okay, this is where we are now, how are we going to refine that? Something I'll share with you in a little bit is reflective of that work. So it's not a one-time process. It really is sort of an iterative process where you're coming back, refining, learning more, coming back to the well. And I do believe, honestly, that the matrix is a reflection of that iteration. It's another step in that iteration of saying, okay, what we originally said was we had the individual distance learning and then we had the on-site. We're now to a point where we have a hybrid. The hybrid lives somewhere. We believe it lives where it makes the most sense is in between a closure and fully opening. I had a conversation, I've had a lot of conversations with different teacher leaders and members of TAC and others. And one of the questions was, what is one of the sticking points? And from TAC, I think that is another one of the sticking points anyway, or an area of concern is where do we start? And we all know everyone is on the same page in terms of what we want. We want a successful opening for as many kids as possible. We want it to be as safe as possible for our kids, our staff, and our families. That's what everyone wants. And I think we're all in agreement to that. It's always the debate comes in when, where is that line? What's the right point to make that decision or to draw that line? And what's reasonable, and what's reasonable to one person may not be to another. So it's a constant process of refinement. We will continue to reach out to teachers. I think we can be more deliberate of ensuring that we have the voice of TAC members included in that conversation, but we need to make sure that we're not losing sight of the fact that the most important information we need right now is how can we make the model that the board has approved as successful as possible.
And I would be remiss as well as if I didn't mention that teachers, as many things as we can define for them, whether it's the childcare issue, whether it's even the use of their sick leave after COVID leave goes away, as many answers as we can give, I think helps calm the waters, because then the certainty is there in a crazy uncertain time. And it may change, and we always say that it may change from day to day, but we'll be transparent, we'll be honest, and we'll communicate directly with you and not sugarcoat it. So what I'm hearing from the board, and it'd be great to have this guidance as we're working up options, is that it seems to be a priority that we be creative with our teachers and problem solving with keeping them in front of the kids. And to me, that's kind of to have that kind of guidance would be helpful as we're working up solutions. But yes, that is the priority of the board, that we want to, work collaboratively with our teachers to see within the parameters of the law, within the parameters of what we need for our kids, to work collaboratively and creatively to meet those needs. Because again, this is such an uncertain time that I think even messaging like that, it matters to our teachers and it matters to all of our staff. Because then we're in it more together as creative problem solvers.
Mr. President?
Yes.
And I apologize if this is going to be addressed in the report, but I'm guessing this is a question for Dave. I guess strictly speaking for the TAC members, not teachers at large, but do you have a sense from just that committee how they feel about the synchronous learning?
It seems to me that there is a bit of a divide. We're hearing much more concern and criticism of the individual distance learning plan from the high school level than the other levels. And I've heard, quite honestly, I've heard in equal measure teachers that are critical of the individual distance learning and those that really appreciate the fact that they're going to have their kids and they're not going to have to plan 2 separate lessons. So it's hard to tell. I think from TAC, there was more of a, TAC's job is to be critical. Their job is to, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, I mean critical, criticizing the plan to find out its weaknesses, help us refine it, help us make it better. That's exactly what they should be doing. But so I would say that the more of the conversation there was concerned about some of the elements of the individual distance learning. I will say, though, that I think part of that is a responsibility of our teaching and learning department to be more clear of what it is. There was some clear confusion as to what individual distance learning is and isn't and will be and won't be. And I'll try to clarify some of that in my report that's coming up soon.
More comments on the TAC?
Okay.
All right, let's move on then to Dave's report on individualized distance learning.
Oh, that was nice. I made my own segue. All right, so individual distance learning. Let me just get my document up here. That was so smooth. I wasn't even ready for it. So individual distance learning. Before we even get into the specifics, I want to talk a little bit about terminology. It's we hear a lot of different terms: hybrid learning, synchronous, asynchronous. Those are more universally used terms. You're going to hear those terms around. We coined this term individual distance learning. Not that we're the only district that is doing synchronous real-time learning, but we were very thoughtful and deliberate with the name. So the distance part is obvious. The distance is happening at a distance. The individual part is meant to describe the fact that we're having conversations with each family who expresses an interest in this sort of learning, because we don't believe it can be a one-size-fits-all. And that applies to the family as well as the plan itself. And so Sue's question about the different meetings that we've had over time, those meetings reflect the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all. So what works for third grade math isn't necessarily going to work for high school algebra. What works for second grade language arts won't necessarily work for fifth grade language arts. So they're very individual and specific plans, as well as what works for one family may not necessarily work for another family. So that's what individual distance learning is all about. And it was strongly influenced by the work we've done with our Hudson Virtual Learning Academy, where we involve ourselves in these deep conversations with families to get a really strong understanding of what the reason for the selection of an alternative learning experience would be, and how we can create a plan then collaboratively to put the best program in place for each student. So from a real general perspective, the idea of individual distance learning is that it defaults to a synchronous model. And when I say default, it will not be synchronous all the time. This is where our return to learn meetings were absolutely invaluable in the advice that they offered, helped us understand where the synchronous model makes absolute sense and where we may need to deviate from that a little bit in each individual area. So I talked through the talking points at the beginning there, and the data I've already shared, and this was data as of Friday, August 7th. As I pointed out, we've added quite a few individuals reporting. So we were at 3,450 as of Friday. We're at 3,754 right now. So we've added about 300 over the weekend, continuing to reach out to families. It is absolutely critical that we get this information from families. This is not a situation that we want to guess. It's absolutely imperative that we understand every family that may be interested in individual learning, so we can make sure that we can individualize that process. How do we do that? How do we go about supporting families and finding out how we can create a very individualized program? It's through a phone call and a conversation. A low tech, pick up the phone, call them, have a conversation. We've developed a protocol that was mail merged from our data, and the principals have already started that process. They're calling, they're reaching out, they're asking questions like, well, what is your greatest area of concern? Or are there specific times of the day that are a greater challenge for you in with your desire to come back full time? And then we also ask questions, is this a full-time decision? Are you deciding this for the entire year, or do you plan on coming back, or are you just not sure? So those are the conversations that we're having. One of the things that we're helping families understand, and we need to do a better job of helping our teachers understand, is that students are not expected to be on screen the entire time they're in any given class. So the way I describe it, if you're in any class, a student is never expected to sit and stare at the teacher, listen to their words, and that's all for the entire time. Not only would that not be good instruction, it's just not, obviously it's not a good practice, it never would translate to different instructional areas. Now, there are certain instructional areas or content areas that lend themselves more to lecturing, but even those, we wouldn't want a situation where it's a lecture every day, and certainly not for the entirety of the learning experience. Now, having said that, that's not the only time that you'd be on screen. There would also be group work where if you're a distance learner, to participate in certain group activities, you may need some interaction with the screen. But there's also time in most classes throughout the day where a student is working individually. And during that time, they would have a break from the screen. So that's important that we help everyone understand that. We're creating a day in the life of individual distance learning videos, and the team that's worked on these videos, it's really, they're coming together very well. We'll be able to release them shortly this week, actually. So we had teacher volunteers that worked on those videos, and what we set out to do is create a snapshot, a look at what a teacher would be doing in that individual distance learning environment, where they're with the classroom. We had kids that volunteered, or families that volunteered their kids to come in and be actors in these little vignettes. And I think they're going to be very valuable both to teachers and to families. We hope to start to create a library of a day in the life videos as we learn more and as we refine our practices. We think in many ways the video is the best way to convey that message. It's much more powerful than a written document could be by itself. More support we'll have for families is the additional support from our IT department. They have been fantastic from March on. Every one of them has committed themselves to supporting in ways they never anticipated, and much more direct support to families than we would anticipate, because now the living room has become a classroom. So we have to extend that support in a way that we hadn't in the past. Support for our teachers. We've really worked on refocusing our professional learning priorities. We know that we cannot expect teachers to be doing everything they're doing, learning as much as they're doing in this brand new environment, and then also be attending a variety of different professional learning opportunities, which may be important, but they're not critical. And right now, our professional learning has to be focused on what is critical. So we're going to funnel our support to the support that teachers need to be successful in an IDL model. That will include our PD from large scale. It will also include our instructional coaching. Another thing that we've done to maximize the time that our teachers will have to plan is we've maximized flexibility in our in-service week, so that those days before when the student, or the teachers rather, are in the schools, but the students aren't there yet, that's very precious PD time. We've tried to strip away all that's not critical, and we've created specific time for teachers to work with their professional learning communities, and more time to work individually to plan and prepare. And then again, the day in the life videos will be helpful to teachers. And then the return to learn meetings have been fantastic. We're in the process of creating an FAQ to take all that information we've learned through the return to learn meetings and then create some guidance. Most importantly, so Sue talked a little bit about speaking Italian to me earlier. She asked if that was a typo, and actually it is supposed to be Grace, not Grazie. And the idea there is grace is absolutely essential. Andrea led us in an activity at our administrative retreat last week where every member of Hudson Lead had come up with 3 words that represented their thoughts on what are we going to need to make sure we focus on, keep in mind to be successful as a team as we move into next year. And several people mentioned the word grace. And in terms of the support that we're going to offer our teachers. We think this is the most significant one. This will be the hardest year our teachers will have professionally, for most teachers. It will be for most staff members in the district, administrators, support staff, everyone. Everything is so new. We all need to we need to give each other grace. We need to give ourselves grace. We need to understand that we're going to be flexible. We're going to continue to learn with teachers, and we don't feel that we have anything set in stone. Sometimes we make decisions that teachers feel are rushed, but in this environment, we do feel strongly that we need to move quickly with decisions, because we can really end up in what's often called the analysis paralysis, where we're thinking, and we're not moving forward with the plan, and we just don't have the time to do that. So we need to be nimble. We need to be able to adjust on the fly. I included, and please know this is very much a draft, but there's a link. It's called sample schedules down below. Hopefully that will open for you. Did that work out? Looks like it. I see people getting into the document. That's good. This is, like I said, just a draft, and we will be refining this as we move forward. But this addresses the issue of screen time, which seems to be one of the areas where there's some confusion on the concept of individual distance learning. Again, students wouldn't be expected to be on screen the entire time. And we have 3 different mock schedules. They look different because each area is very different. The elementary was built on the concept of our instructional guarantees. So we have what we call instructional guarantees for each content area at the elementary. And part of it is based on time, but part of it is based on learning outcomes. We took the time-based elements and we said, you know what? This is how our schedule is built, and this is what it looks like. I'll use an example. I'll use 2 examples. ELA, so English Language Arts. Every one of those bullet points there, those are the components of our typical English Language Arts sequence. We have a 120-minute block for ELA. I'm sorry, actually it's 120 minutes with writing is separate. Of that time, at least 40 minutes of that is dedicated to guided reading. Now, guided reading takes place in small groups, so it would only be 3 or 4 students at a time working on screen with the teacher or in person with the teacher. During the rest of that time, students would be independently reading or working on their stamina. When we talk about stamina, it's their reading stamina, working on kids being able to independently read for an amount of time that we think is developmentally appropriate. So that's an opportunity for a screen break. And we go through each one of the areas and call that out. I'm going to scroll down. We're not going to go into great detail, but if we get to the bottom, the daily totals, if we take out some of those times that are not screen-based, we have up to a total of 3 hours and 45 minutes that student would be on screen. And even with that, it's not a consecutive 3 hours and 45 minutes. Now, to some people, that might be an unreasonable amount of screen time, but I think for the families that opted for individual distance learning, they obviously knew that there would be screen time involved, doing our best to mitigate that. If we look at the middle school model, the middle school team has done a fantastic job of creating essentially a universal lesson plan that talks about breaking up the time in a way that would be very effective both on-site and online. So if we just look at the world studies as an example, each teacher will start with an engaging opener that will be on screen. Then they'll have a lesson, mini lesson, sometimes we call that, 10 to 15 minutes. That's when they're providing direct instruction. Then there would be student work for 20 to 25 minutes. Now, during that time, yes, a student would have their computer out. What we're advising, it's the 45-degree rule. When they don't need help, they can tilt their screen at 45 minutes, or 45 degrees rather. The teacher would see essentially the keyboard from the camera, and the teacher would then know that student is working independently and doesn't need help. But if you picture independent work in a classroom, that's not an opportunity for a teacher to not be busy or working at their desk. They're circulating through the room, helping students when they need help on whatever it is they're working independently on. We want to make sure that those individual distance learners have that same access. So then they would just open their screen and receive that help as if they were in the classroom. And then similarly broke down a high school schedule. In fact, I should point out both of these middle school and high school schedules are actual schedules we pulled from Skyward. We wanted them to be representative of a typical middle school or high school student. As an example, in the middle school, we selected a student that had one music experience, then they have music opposite PAT. So during PAT, that would be a break from that screen time. So we'll continue to refine this because I think it'll be a helpful instructional model when we'll have a student or a family-friendly version and a teacher-friendly version. We can see, I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom in the high school. If a student were in all of their classes and did nothing but they were on screen the entire time, that would be a total of 5 hours and 15 minutes. We know that's not the case. There will be asynchronous options in classes. There will be blends. It defaults and starts at a synchronous model, but then there's opportunities for that asynchronous work. We would anticipate screen time between 3 and 4 hours for a high school student in a typical day. Again, what we're trying to do here is learn as we go and get our feedback from teachers and refine the model as we move forward. But with that, what questions do you have?
Questions of board members on the individualized distance learning?
Dave, just one question. I appreciate the trying to help parents get their arms around the whole question of screen time. And my experience, at least the little bit of work I've done with my kids on their homework, is that because kids no longer really have textbooks and no longer write in notebooks, I mean, that a lot of their independent work is actually on their screen, right? I mean, so I think that's, I mean, just to be transparent about that, I think it seems like especially at the upper levels, you know, it's not the put your screen at 45 minutes while you've got your textbook out or what. I mean, that a lot of that independent work and even the reading, I think a lot of kids read on their screens when they're doing their independent reading. So are there ways that we kind of can, I guess, encourage parents or provide them with tools so they can help their kids maximize that non-screen time? Because I think left to their own, the kids are going to default to screen because that's their world.
Sure. Yeah. And that's a really good question because it's sort of an interesting paradox, right? We're saying we're going to offer something virtually that depends on technology, yet we don't want to be overly dependent on technology. And we want to make sure that we have other opportunities. We're setting up systems where we will be able to pick up and drop off materials safely between schools that will allow us to use traditional books, textbooks, notebooks, that sort of thing. And this is where we really do need to rely on teachers because this is an example. We can create a model that is generally applicable across the board, but teachers are the experts that are going to know if we say what we'd like to do is present the general model. Now, how can we maximize the time, minimize the screen time when it's not essential, and maximize engagement? We need to learn from teachers. So what we want to get to is a point where we can provide a framework, but then provide that framework to teachers, and then they do their planning within that framework and look for those opportunities for reduced screen time. It is going to vary by teacher, by subject. There will be some kids that just based on the nature of their schedule, especially if they're really driven kids, they don't have a study hall, they're in many high-level electives, that likely will have more time on the screen. But those are choices we need to guide through the process. That is, some of that dialogue is what we hope to have come out of the individual distance learning meetings with principals, because they'll be having a one-on-one conversation with families. That's a huge burden on our principals, all the calls they need to make to go through this process. But we think it's a critical component because so the conversation, I can respond to your question, Heather, but I won't be able to respond as well as a principal will be able to respond to a specific concern about a specific schedule with a specific student.
Other comments or questions, board members? I really appreciate this explanation, Dave, and how this has been fleshed out. I know that there's never going to be a perfect solution to all of this, and you're stuck between a rock and a hard place and trying to not have quote unquote too much screen time. But I have to say, having reviewed now dozens of emails from families since March, it's at least 10 to 1, if not 20 to 1, that parents were indicating that their kids were not getting enough learning. I got very few complaints that their kids were on the computer too much. If anything, the learning at the end of last year school, they would say that they were on the screen 30 to 45 minutes and then they were done for the day. So I think anything that can increase the amount of learning, and I still believe that in-person learning is the best. But if we have to go to virtual, I think that this is a more than adequate plan. It's much better than what we had. Any other comments? Yes, Sue.
Yeah, I had shared with Dave earlier that I just love the design of this because it keeps emphasizing the idea of options and not trying to manipulate or be controlling what teachers do. And it isn't controlling even about the receptivity of children learning and so on. And I'll end with one other Italian word, miracola, means miracle. That's in place too, I think.
All right. Any other questions then for Dave? Otherwise, I'm going to make executive decision. If there's any opposition, let me know, but we would table the discussion on the expulsion, pre-expulsion report. There's no statutory requirement. We deal with it tonight. We're 3 hours plus into the meetings for the board. And I would entertain a 5-minute recess if others agree. Otherwise, we'll plow through if I'm outvoted 6 to 1 on that. Okay, I don't see any opposition, so we'll take a 5-minute recess and reconvene at 8:40. Why is my screen show? Okay. I don't. I've got this instead of that.
So if you click on that, click over here, click on that. Right. There, yeah, click on that big button there.
Just makes that bigger.
Oh, gallery view up top.
Yeah. You gotta exit full screen.
Okay.
All right, we're ready when you are, Jamie.
Okay. Call the meeting back to order, and for those that may have been watching or are still watching after 3 hours or nearly 3 hours that we've been live, all board members are present here at the ASC, and most of the cabinet is not in the room, and that's why if you see some people without masks, they're in their individual offices. But here at the ASC, everyone has been mask compliant. So with that introduction, we did skip over the one report and table it to the next meeting, which would be in September, I guess, or possibly October, depending on when we need to address it. But at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent items.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Move approval of the consent items and that the Chief Financial and Operations Officer be authorized to pay bills in the amount of $1,133,546.46.
Second.
Motion by Rob, second by Sue. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Then next up is the 2020-2021 proposed substitute pay rates. And is this going to be Andrea and/or Tim?
Yeah, it's gonna be Andrea.
Andrea, all right.
Okay, so what we have linked here is a document with our recommendations for the 2020-2021 school year for substitute rates. I think it's important to note that this may be only applicable to this school year. We may revisit this in the future because it is such a big increase to our rates. But for this year, knowing the staffing issues that we're going to be facing, it's our recommendation at this time to make these adjustments. So specifically, we would go from $125 a day to $200 a day, which would put us ahead of any surrounding districts. And then also, as recently as Friday, DPI has given us additional flexibility. If we have a licensed teacher instructing virtually, that some classroom supervision can be done by non-licensed individuals. So basically our teacher would be instructing the students in the class virtually, and then we would have someone else monitor the behaviors and the transitions and the activities of the students during the day. And so that would be at a lower rate. That would be at the $120 a day. We'd be maintaining the long-term sub rate, which is based on our BA base at $234, and as well as the $25 for the extra period pay would be the same. The other piece that we're looking at modifying with this proposal would be to our support staff rates. We've had $1 to $13 an hour for all substitute support staff rates for a very long time. And so what we're proposing is something more tied inherently to the schedule itself, which is essentially $1 an hour less than the regular position hourly rate. So there's still a differential, certainly a significant differential between steps 2 and steps 3 for our hourly staff. But for the starting rate, there's still a differential, but it might be more enticing for our people in the community that may be willing to perform these positions on a substitute basis. So this is one piece of a larger process that we've been working on, and Holly Thorson and Holly Butler have been working incredibly hard on analyzing the data. We've been reaching out to every one of our substitutes in our substitute pool that have signed up with the district to find out what their availability is going into next year. We have been charting things. We've been trying to find out what is the current lay of the land with our current substitutes, and then what's our next step forward in terms of communication to the community, communication, advertisements to increase our pool so that we are able to address potential staffing shortages as we're going into this challenging school year. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts. It's high level summary of this plan.
Andrea, just clarifying question. Are these recommendations for across the board for this year only? Or is it just the certified staff, going to $200 a day? Is that a 1-year recommendation?
For the certified, it is a 1-year recommendation. For support staff, frankly, we've needed to do this kind of adjustment for a while because we've had very few substitutes at the support level. And so I think that that makes a lot of sense structurally going forward. The certified one, because of significant increase to that daily rate and the corresponding costs and on the budget and the burden on the budget, that would be something we may want to review in the future, not knowing what that will hold. But I think that one would be the one that would be I'd be a little more cautious on than the support staff ones.
Okay. But thank you for that clarification. Rob.
So Andrea, going from $125 to $200 is really significant. Can you talk a little bit about what our neighbors are paying for substitutes and why do we need to go to $200 a day? And I don't know if Nick wants to participate too, but.
I think I'm certainly aware of like River Falls is a 170. I think the Somerset, their long-term sub rate, which we're posting some full-time vacancies, they're at 221 a day. So for the districts that are posting the year-long substitute positions, I think $200 makes us more competitive with those positions, which also offer benefits, right? So we're still not going to be necessarily competitive with those unique year-long substitute positions, but we'll hopefully attract anybody who's looking amongst, just a day-to-day position where they want to be helping out the district. We would be the go-to in the area. So $200 was an attempt to be the highest rate for the substitute rate in the area. I certainly heard some angst from some of the other districts around about this higher rate. I think our goal is to staff our buildings, and we're hopeful that this will help attract people to Hudson and keep them in Hudson when they be making substantially more than in surrounding districts.
So New Richmond and River Falls and Somerset, they're paying well over $100, $200?
Well, their regular daily rate for subs is right about ours. They tend to match ours, what it was for 1920, so about 125. So they tend to match our rates there. Where they're posting year-long substitute rates, then it's based off their BA base, and then on a per diem basis, it's higher than our $200 a day. But at this time, we're not looking to fill long-term sub or to fill year-long sub positions. And so this is kind of a way to keep competitive as well.
You see this playing into COVID?
Yes.
Can you explain that, please?
In terms of why we need to go to this rate?
Correct.
It's because I'm significantly concerned regarding our capacity to staff the buildings if we have multiple quarantines going on, right? Like if we have staff who are directed health to quarantine, if we have staff impacted, whether it's daycare, whether it's their own personal health condition, getting COVID, getting any other type of sickness at this time, there's a hesitancy of some people to sub and work in the buildings. And so I feel like it is a direct result of the COVID world that we're living in right now, that we're making this temporary potential permanent. But at this time, I'd be looking at this for 2020, 2021, primarily this temporary significant adjustment to the sub rate.
Okay, thank you.
Sue.
I'm just going to go ahead and make the motion.
Okay.
I move that we approve the Human Resources Department's recommendations to increase the wage or the payment for our substitute teachers and for the rates for support staff substitutes.
Second.
All right. Motion by Sue, second by Bruce. Heather, did you have any further comment?
Well, Andrea, and I'm sorry if I missed it. So we don't at this point hire any full-time substitute teachers. Is that correct?
Right, we do not at this time.
I guess all I would add, to kind of follow up on Rob's question is, do we really need to do this? And it's very anecdotal, but I talked to 2 recently retired certified teachers. And I said, would you come back and help us out? Because they have been contacted by the district. And they said $125 a day, no way. It would take a substantial increase. I think 66% increase is a substantial increase. So I think we stand a much better chance of making our 5-day-a-week goal successful. If we don't do this, I think we might as well go to virtual or hybrid. Yes, agreed, Carrie.
Mr. President, I fully understand the rationale of why we need to entice substitutes, but without making a recommendation on the how much we're willing to support potential school age care for our teachers, I will not vote for this tonight. I won't approve it tonight.
All right.
Will not.
Okay.
I guess a follow-up to that would be, do we have a sense for the financial impact, the likely financial impact on the district to moving from, what seems to be market rate of 125 up to this proposed 200?
Yeah, it could be somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 cost difference.
It really depends though, like how many quarantines we have. And
It depends on but we basically looked at if we took a typical year, not last year, but the year before, and moved all those sub rates up to this, what would it potentially be? And we don't know. I mean, we could potentially be 100% virtual by Christmas for the rest of the year. And then our sub rate is going to drop, the amount we need for subs is going to drop. I think it's, everything that as Tim talked about in the last budget update, we are sitting in a pretty good financial position as we ended the year, and things like this they're somewhat one-time expenditures, especially if we're saying that these are related to COVID. And when you figure about wanting to, not take our savings account, which is fund balance, and spend it on reoccurring expenses year after year after year, this may put us in the best position to move forward and understand, staffing our buildings. And so, a lot of times what we hear from staff is, what's the district going to do to try to attract more subs? And right now the sub pool we know is getting smaller because a lot of our subs are retired staff members that said, you know what, I'm just not comfortable subbing yet. Maybe down the road, but if we can attract more subs, potentially even from other districts, that would allow us to keep our buildings open. That's the rationale. When River Falls started to hear that we were doing this, I think they went to 170. So they went from 125 to 170, and they approved that last week, I believe, to go up. And so that's typically been every time we've moved sub rates in this district, typically New Richmond, River Falls follow suit within a few weeks, Andrew?
Yep, shortly after. Yep.
So this was an effort to kind of set us apart. I do not believe that approving this sub rate, and Tim can correct me, would impact our ability to subsidize childcare for staff related to the COVID related childcare. So at this time, we believe we probably can handle both. Now, not for years and years and years and years and years, but we believe that we could probably handle both. So it wouldn't be like if you approve this, Carrie, all of a sudden we can't do the staff childcare.
Which I appreciate, and I am fully supportive of upping our rate. I just, in good conscience, can't vote for it without having that piece resolved as well.
I totally understand that.
Okay. All right. And just to clarify, because, this Heather brought up the cost issue and everything, but Sue, in your motion, it was to adopt the HR recommended 1 year for the certified staff, correct? Okay, very good. And Bruce,
1 year.
That was your intention, just second that. All right, Bob.
And my only comment would be, I agree with Carrie, and I think we will take care of that, and it is a separate item. I think we're putting dollar numbers on all these different things, PPE and all these other items that we're doing to keep us open. I think this is probably a no-brainer because we've seen what happens when we are in trouble with subs in the past, and why we would think that this wouldn't be a given we'll have trouble. So if we're really interested in keeping it open 5 days, I think this is the way to go. Thank you.
All right. Any other
And
comments, questions?
I will just say, in
Yes.
Dave's word, grace, we can also think of peace. And I think we need some peace of mind for HR because of this unknown plan that we have, or unknown entering fall semester.
All those in favor of voting for the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it, and the recommended pay increases are approved on the schedule as recommended. Next up is mask protocol.
This will be Dave and Aaron.
Yep, and Aaron will start out for us.
Okay, can you hear me? Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. So we've been working on a mask protocol for a few weeks, and then certainly the governor's order shifted the direction a little bit in terms of when we are requiring a face mask and when we do not require a face mask. And so we developed this protocol that we walked through with Hudson Lead last week and got some input in terms of just different areas in terms of students and when we're requiring and when we're not requiring. So you do need a face covering when inside, even if you are physically distanced. And this is a little bit different direction than we were taking with just the board mandate of wearing a mask. So different communication to teachers pretty quickly, especially with summer school and our ESY programming. Face coverings are also required when exercising indoors or in an enclosed space. And are strongly recommended if you are outdoors and maintaining physical distancing is not possible. So lots of conversations around that at our administrative meetings last week. You do not need to wear a face covering. This one is specific to our Hudson classrooms right now. If you are providing instruction within the taped classroom area, where essentially is what's viewable to the distant learners, and are able to remain 6 feet away from those in your class. If teachers or staff are moving about the classroom, then they're required to have their mask on. Masks are not required when you're eating or drinking, not required when communicating with someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, and you're not able to communicate while wearing a mask. We are looking at some clear face masks for this reason, obviously not for all staff, but something that we are considering. And then while swimming or being on duty as a lifeguard, and masks are not required, similar to how, you know, we're approaching this right now when you're the only person in a room or space. Some things that we've been talking through are students who are unable to wear a mask. And so this language comes directly from the governor's order. So students must have a documented medical condition, intellectual or developmental disability, or mental health condition. And so we're working through that protocol with students and families, and our extended school year program for some of our students with IEPs has led us to some great conversations around this. And what we're learning is that there are less students than we originally thought who are not able to wear a face mask. And so families have been great about having collaborative conversations with us about, instead of just going from all or nothing, are there other options we can try? Can we try a face mask? Can we work to increase the tolerance of wearing a face mask? And then providing those face mask breaks and taking students outside to get that break. Questions about that, and then Dave will kind of walk through students who are not wearing masks and kind of that teaching protocol and disciplinary protocol.
This looks great.
All right, so I'll take it from there. Thanks, Aaron. So as Aaron said, I'll cover what happens if a student is not wearing a mask. And I would go back to that word grace. We know this is a process. There's a learning curve for a lot of folks, and there's going to be times when people just forget. So the first thing we need to do if a student isn't wearing a mask is determine if the student is required to wear a mask. So as Aaron just shared, there are certain circumstances in which a student would not be required to wear a mask. So we need to make sure that that's the case. We're working with the administrative teams at each level to come up with a system that is discreet and yet quick and easy to determine if a student does indeed not isn't required to wear a mask, whether that is a sticker on an ID badge, a card, something that is simple and easy to use. At the elementary level, it will not be as big of a deal because we're dealing with fewer students, so it'd be easier for the staff to get a handle on which students may not be required to wear a mask. And then this one sounds like it should be so common sense that we don't need to call it out, but if a student is required, then we need to ask them to put it on. We've seen some models out there where it goes right into the disciplinary sequence, and that's not where we want to land. We need to ask them to put it on. Now, obviously, if a student is refusing first hour, second hour, third hour, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then we're going to need to kick into the last 3 bullet points there. And that is if a student refuses to wear a mask. I should mention this portion of the protocol was developed in close collaboration with both Jim DeLune and Mike Ballard, middle school and high school principals, as they anticipate having to deal with some of these issues, and I think they're probably right. So the first offense is that the student will be sent to the office for a call home and a warning. Just let them know, it is required, you need to wear a mask, and explain that to the family. Second offense, the parent is asked to pick up that child. Now it says the child is suspended for the remainder of the day. Now that would be the default, but at that point, if the child says, you know what, I'm just not going to do it, so I'm going to do this IDL thing, we would quickly transition them into the individual distance learning, and that would be a fine choice. At the third offense, then we would have mandatory individual distance learning for the period of 1 week. So that's the protocol that we've agreed on at this point. Any questions on that portion?
Mr. President.
Rob.
So River Falls apparently has this 3 strikes rule. So it gets right to that, a little more strict, use of the mask. It looks like we're not doing that here. And so we have this third offense, this mandatory distance learning for 1 week. What happens when they come back and they still refuse, if that were to happen?
Yeah, I mean, if that were, and obviously this protocol could have been 12 bullet points to get to every circumstance, but at that point, if a student goes mandatory IDL for 1 week, they come back and they still refuse, we would probably have to have a conversation about either a permanent shift to IDL if it's clear that they're just not going to do it, or at least an extended portion of time in IDL. Even when I'm saying this, it doesn't sound quite right because it almost sounds like IDL is the punishment, but it's just really the choice that the family is making at that point or the student is making. I'm not willing to comply with these rules in the school. Therefore, we have this option. Even though they may not have selected that themselves, at that point, we become the institution that selects that choice.
Thank you. All right, so that concludes the report.
It does, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Move.
Can I quickly, just a comment? Dave, one thing maybe to add, and I think it's implicit and it came through in your words, but that first offense, I mean, it sounds like it's sent to the office for education, a call home and a warning. I mean, that there's an opportunity there that we're helping, if a child hasn't already heard this, explain why we're requiring it. And if this is a kid that is refusing on principle, they're maybe not going to be very open to that information. But I like the idea that, that first offense is an opportunity to, yes, warn and call home, but also inform or really share kind of why we're doing this. So would love to make sure that's part of the plan for that first offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for calling that out. That is important. And we should probably add that we're going to have proactive education for all students to embed it into the advisories where they understand why the masks. It's really important that students, staff, families all understand the why behind the decisions. Now, obviously, the state mandate made that why a little bit more crystal clear, but it's still important that everyone understands how we're going to enforce it and what the protocols would be. So there'll be that proactive education part. We view that point that you called out, Heather, as that's the opportunity, the first time that we're pulling the family directly into the conversation. Up until then, the conversation has been directly between the school and the student.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? If we could scroll up the document to the top.
I would just have one
Yes.
question. So we're talking about making it simple, so like on their IDs or their school badges or?
Yeah, we haven't totally finalized what that looks like. Kids don't currently carry IDs with them all the time. So it may be as simple as issuing a card or something like that that they could show an adult.
I would just say that I have heard from parents that have questioned about how strict we would be, and they expect that if they're sending their child to school that there will be enforcement of that. So
Well, I mean, this outlines it. I mean, it would be enforced. I mean, could there be a parent that might email you or text you and say, hey, my kid took a picture of somebody not wearing a mask, and maybe that was a kid that literally 3 minutes later, a staff member is having a conversation with and putting the mask on. I mean, what I can tell you is we will enforce the mask mandate. It is an expectation that kids wear them. We find that there are very few circumstances in which somebody would qualify for an exception, and we'll deal with it accordingly. I mean, that's the best we can do at this point.
Thank you.
So when it says that you do need to wear the face covering when exercising indoors or in an enclosed space. So there's 5-on-5 basketball in the gym. They're all going to be wearing masks.
As of right now, the governor's order is any and all activity inside requires a mask, whether they're playing basketball, whether they're sitting in an algebra class, whether they're running laps around the track. As the governor's order sits right now, and as we start the school year, yes, they will be required to wear a mask at all times unless they have a doctor's note, essentially saying they can.
And I know implicit in your answer is that the governor's order will still be in place by September 2nd. Which I have my doubts about that. So if it's not in place, we're adopting this protocol and it's going to be in place regardless of what the governor says.
So if you adopt this protocol tonight, this will be our protocol until you guys decide to change it at a future time. So this happens to align with the governor's order because that makes obviously the most sense to have it align with the governor's order. So we're in compliance. However, if the governor's order is overturned, as long as this is still something that you guys have not adopted a new set of procedures, this will be kind of the law of the land in the Hudson School District.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I guess I wonder if we might make a slight amendment. I do have a concern about students who are going to not wear their mask until they're asked and then put it on and then not wear their mask. And I know you said if that happened that we would address that as a refusal. Am I getting a weird echo?
You unmuted yourself.
Sorry about that. But I'm wondering if we could insert language like if a student repeatedly fails or refuses. I mean, to let parents know that we're not going to ride with kids who just don't wear their masks except when they are reminded to put them on, that's not going to be okay. Kind of to your point, Bob, about I think parents are expecting that this is going to be a standard and not a slide.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just want to be careful that you don't make things so descriptive that you take any and all discretion away from our school administrators and our teaching staff. And so the administrative team understands what the expectation is. And if they're constantly dealing with the same kids, similar to what we've have with any other school rules, they apply them, in a way that they feel they need to in order to get a change in the behavior or in order to protect the health, safety and well-being of the kids. So
What you're saying, Nick, is that administration is going to interpret a repeated failure as a refusal. We don't
Yes.
need this. We don't need to spell that.
yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's what Dave talked about is essentially, okay, if we're having to remind you multiple times every day, now it's gone from just I forgot to you're refusing to wear it. Now we start working down that list. But we may have some kids that truly it is I forgot. And other kids it is a passive aggressive way for them to not wear the mask. So I just want to give the benefit of the doubt to the folks that actually have to enforce it.
All right, I'm comfortable with that.
All right. Other
Mr. President?
questions or a motion? Yes, Carrie.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
All right. And you took away Carrie's thunder. She was going to make the motion. All right. So I appreciate that. You know, it's a little harder to read facial expressions though with the masks on. So we're all just trying to move this meeting along. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of adopting the mask protocol signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, motion carries. Next up is the leave decisions.
Yeah, I mean, and leave decisions is really a challenging one. I mean, you know, we did have the closed session earlier tonight with the attorney. And I think we had this on the agenda in case you guys are ready to move on it. But what it seems to me from the closed session is that you want us to come back with kind of a full written recommendation and then you guys would act on it at the 24th, or what are your thoughts? I mean, I don't want to push into it. I know that in talking with Andrea, this is one of those things that are hanging out there that staff want to know what's going to happen. And it's one of those unknowns, uncertainties. However, if you're at a point where you say, well, you know what, I just really want the whole thing kind of wrapped up into an actual document to either approve or tweak, then we could have it ready for you for the 24th.
Mr. President.
Rob.
I mean, I would agree with that statement, Nick. This is a big topic and an important topic. And it's likely better for administration to come back with that recommendation versus us, forgive my words, but cobble something together based on what we're thinking. And that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. And like I said, it really was a placeholder. It was our hope that, you know, if the board felt really strongly a certain way, or if we said, oh, hey, this is definitely the direction to go. But I think the questions were very good and there was a lot of discussion in the closed session. And, you know, which gives us some pause. Andrea, at any point you can jump in and what your thoughts are on this.
I do worry a bit waiting till the 24th that, because we are already doing our new teacher orientation on the 22nd, about having the time necessary to deal with the individual requests, depending on, I mean, we sent out the survey a couple weeks ago from staff asking for, you know, are there any health or childcare issues that you're facing as a result of COVID? And then also, do you have any medical limitations or issues that need to be addressed as well? So certainly we'll continue to have conversations with staff. I think the trying part is that I can't give them answers on some of those areas until we get a little bit more guidance from the board. So I think that's just my hesitancy in that it's really hard for staff right now. And I mean, us trying to reassure them that we'll continue to work with them. I mean, I think that's what we're definitely communicating. And a lot of them are wanting certainty in this time of uncertainty. That's hard.
Is there, are we not going to see that document? Was that part of it that was up there, or was that something else?
On the leaves?
Yeah.
There wasn't a document because
okay.
it was literally a placeholder to make sure that if all of a sudden the board felt very strongly coming out of closed session, we had it on the agenda to be able to make that determination. And I agree with Andrea. I mean, anything we can do sooner rather than later to alleviate some of the unknowns is great. However, I also, understand what Rob's saying, that, it is a big decision. It may be that we may be polling the board for a potentially special meeting sometime, middle of next week to try to, find out when you guys will be able to meet to knock a couple of these.
I don't
topics
think
off
we should
sooner.
wait to the 24th. I mean, this is, all the emails we're getting is related to this topic. And so I think the sooner we can make a decision, the better. Are we saying we'd like something a little bit more formalized from Andrea, or,
And I do have that, I do have a document that has been reviewed by Shana, that it's called Temporary Options during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I do have a draft, but just based on our conversations today and then tonight too, that'll have to be modified. So I mean, that's the world we're in right now. It's changing so fast depending upon the developments, that even what we have prepared to give staff more of a blueprint, and then you as a board as well, like kind of what we're thinking, it will have to continue to change. And so I can certainly update that and provide revisions to that well before, I mean, if we have a special meeting scheduled coming up, that would be fantastic.
I would like to see a special meeting next week. We could probably even meet in a Zoom if we wanted.
Yeah, I would prefer this week since I'm not in town.
This week would be fine with me, I believe. Oh, yeah, this week, yeah.
Okay. I mean, okay.
Carrie, did you have some comment?
No, I don't think they're watching. My in-laws are coming up this week, but we can do it any night this week. So
Jerry's looking for multiple special
no.
meetings. Is that what I'm
I
hearing
love
you
my
say?
in-laws.
I have a modified eye surgery thing tomorrow morning at 6. So as long as it's later in the day, I can do it.
Well,
we need to have a 24-hour period to post it. So,
yep. Okay. So is there, I mean, and again, it's all related to this. Is there a certain time of day that you, I mean, does it work better to do early morning, midday, at night? Do you have I mean, we need to be able to post it 24 hours in advance, like I said, but
I would say just have them send some options out to us and we can have to all be responsive.
you understand? I mean, you understand if we send it out tomorrow morning, you'll have like 2 hours to respond to it if we're gonna have some options that are available on Wednesday. So you won't be able to take a day to think about it. So, okay. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Can we just right now say like, let's meet Wednesday night? Can we just take a day?
Wednesday's good for me. And Thursday, Friday night. Wednesday night's not great. Again, after 7:30 or 7.
What about earlier Wednesday? What about like 4? Before 3? Okay. We could zoom in those that can't be here in person. Yeah, I mean, we could work that. I mean, really, the earliest we could do this is Wednesday, probably noon. Is the earliest we could do this because we just, by the time we put the agenda and get it posted, we're going to need at least 4 hours tomorrow to do that. So if we're going to say,
I say 2 o'clock. How's 2 o'clock sound? Wednesday. Good.
2
Mr.
o'clock on
President,
Wednesday work?
and Nick, would we be able to at that meeting also have the conversation about some of the daycare related issues? I mean, can we knock out a couple of kind of the follow-ups on this? Or is that
Yeah,
too, is
I
it soon
just-
for staff?
I mean, otherwise we're going to have to, I mean, if you put too much into it, it's a quick turnaround. Well, and it's a
Yeah.
quick turnaround for us to try
That's
to,
what I'm wondering about staff pulling it together.
No, I'd prefer to keep the daycare thing on for the 24th.
I will just say from school age care standpoint, there's staffing issues related to that as well. If we hold on that, you've got staff waiting to make a decision on Andrea's end. Also, yeah, I mean, they're
What
all
about Friday?
connected.
I mean, Friday,
I'm out Thursday noon through Monday evening.
I mean, is there anything wrong with trying to do Tuesday of next week? I mean, can you zoom in?
I might be able to have an internet connection. I don't know.
I mean, I just, the other thing is we have some people that are pretty pivotal in this conversation that are supposed to be on vacation. And so they will be working through their vacation in order to get you guys this information. I mean, I mean.
Next Tuesday's fine.
Well, you know your team, Nick. I think you should,
Yeah.
these are two important discussion items, and I want to make sure that
When are you
your
back,
team
Bruce?
has sufficient vetting.
Would you be able to zoom in? Okay. Yeah. Or
I'll do my best. I mean,
you're going Monday, you said, through Monday or
we're driving over.
what does Sunday look like for people? Sunday evening. I know you'll be gone, but can you remote in? Okay.
I can do that.
I mean, otherwise we'll just stick with the 24th, and it's not great, but I just don't know if we can have everything ready to go. I don't know if we can have everything ready to go by Wednesday. I just know that we have multiple staff members, their travel day is Tuesday, Wednesday. I mean, they're going to be in transit. I mean, it's one thing to ask people that while they're on vacation to find a location and see if you can zoom in. It's another thing to try to put stuff together while you're in transit. I guess to me, I think to be fair, if we can push it towards next week or towards the end of next week so that we have enough time to do this justice, I prefer it. I know it's going to mess with our staff, to some extent. And I know Tracy definitely has a concern. It's a very valid concern because if the board, from what I understand tonight, the board would plan on offering childcare some way, shape, form. We just got to determine what is the cost associated. I don't think anybody's opposed to us offering some type of childcare for our employees. The bigger question is just how much are we going to pay? Is that what I'm hearing people say?
Yeah.
Did we discuss next Friday's availability at all? Next Friday morning?
Heather's gone.
That was this Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we, well, wouldn't next Friday be before the new orientation, new staff member orientation?
Next Friday is the new staff member
so,
orientation.
So, and
So
you're
that would
gone
be a
through
no.
Thursday, you said? Bruce has gone through Thursday? Oh, through Monday. You're gone through Thursday?
Monday through Thursday.
You're gone all week? I just think at this point, putting it on the 24th is probably going to be
The only other thing is just you could put out some times and see if it works and we can make it work. I'll do everything in my power to make it work. It's just
you just won't know yet, and I understand that. And Jamie won't know either. I mean, he doesn't know if he has connectivity either next week.
So I've heard that there's Wi-Fi, but it's also way out in the boonies.
We could make this an agenda item right at the top.
What's that?
We could make this an agenda item at the top of our meeting, and then Andrea is dismissed and she can go write it up, get it out.
On the 24th, you mean? Yeah, I mean, why don't let me talk with the cabinet team and kind of brainstorm with them a little bit and look at it and see if there's anything we can try to work between now and the 24th, but the default is the 24th. Worst case scenario, it kicks to the 24th.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so it's tabled till the 24th or potentially earlier if we can find a special meeting date. So that sounds good.
All right. Next up is activities department and the COVID-19 planning. Aaron is on.
And this is one we can't quite kick down the road to the 24th because if WIA and DHS doesn't change where their current recommendation is, technically some of these sports would start in about a week from today. So I'll turn it over to Aaron. He can kind of give you kind of a brief overview of what he has there. Go ahead, Aaron.
Might be on mute.
No, he's not muted, but we can't hear him.
Is the microphone on your computer working? Speak with experience.
Once again, we have Jamie leading our
I love it.
tech troubleshooting.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey,
All right.
Jamie's suggestion worked.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time. As I probably don't have to provide the perspective, but these programs mean a lot to our students, staff, and community. And there's been a lot of flux over the last 6 months, as there has been with everything. I'll do my best to provide an update. I know these things have been discussed, so I'm going to try and kind of lay out our options with fall athletics clubs and organizations. To note, I did intentionally leave out the fine arts. As we discussed earlier, those programs are part of a separate discussion group. So as I work through, I think it's important to start with the objectives. As many have mentioned today, our staff and students have done a great job this summer with the guidelines we put in place for summer school, activities contact days, our Raider Elite strength conditioning. And I think that aligns with what I'm going to get into in terms of our guiding principles. But the number one, objective that I've tried to keep in terms of our conversations with coaches and district and admin and whoever's involved in these discussions is we're prepared to continue to provide these education-based activities for our students. They will continue to look different, but we're prepared to adapt however we may need to provide these opportunities throughout the entire school year. So I know our current conversations on fall athletics, we're a little bit up against the wall here with that first round of low risk starting in a week. But we are paying attention and modeling our decisions out for the entire school year as well, because I think everyone in here knows that this isn't just a short-term issue we're going to be dealing with. So with that in mind, I'll work through, I'll touch a little bit on the guiding principles, but I think everybody's really familiar with those. We're always just making sure that our decisions in athletics, just like everybody is, align with those, especially during this time. Beginning with mitigation strategies, we have on a lot of fronts used what we could from the district to stay consistent, but we have added some of our own in terms of the extracurricular specific things that we would deal with. A couple highlights: the mask mandate is something that we're continuing to evolve with. For a period of time, we were not wearing a mask if we're able to socially or physically distance, but now we are wearing masks at all times. So unless we're outside and we're spread out on a football field, our students are wearing masks. And that's when we can be controlled in that physical distancing. And depending on how long that goes, will impact what sports may look like. We theoretically could have every one of our fall sports being required to wear masks while participating, with maybe an exception to girls golf when they're able to get to their space and stay physically distanced from whoever they're playing with. The other would be the capacity for spectators. Across our conference, we have up to 7 counties involved. And our conversations have been across the board in terms of what we would like to have in terms of spectators present. The main group that's going to dictate that number is our county guidelines and what we're given in terms of outside and inside occupancy. Our hope would be that we could have immediate family members there, but if that's not something that's feasible, we are prepared to try and expose those events through streaming and broadcasting and local TV as much as we possibly can. So the other basic factors to touch on: athletic training, attendance, cleaning, concessions, and down the list are things that we're going to continue to evaluate. We've added things to the list, we've modified, we've taken things away, and as with everything, that's something we're going to continue to monitor so that when we are able to return to competition, whether that's this month, whether that's in the spring, wherever we land, we have things in place to make sure that we can mitigate the risk associated with doing so. Everybody's main goal is to make sure that we can get our kids here and learn. That remains all of our main goals in terms of the coaching staff as well. It would be an absolute bonus, an awesome time if we could get kids back into extracurricular activities. And we think putting these mitigation strategies in place will help us be able to do that when it comes time. On to clubs and organizations. This is more of just a highlight. I think this area is in a very good position to continue participating with their current framework. Many of the competitive clubs do have virtual options that they can compete in, such as forensics and future problem solvers. I think even more, the ones that may not have a great option are looking at ways to be able to do that. And it's easier for them to be able to compete virtually because there's not the physical team versus team competition. Our forensics team may be competing, but it's more of an individual competition where scores are totaled and added up. So I think our clubs and organizations are in a great spot. With our non-competition and our student interest clubs, we're still pursuing ways to keep kids involved. One of the potential cons of that is it would be, if we went virtual, more screen time to the day. The pro would be we're still establishing connections in a different way for our students with staff members, advisors, coaches. That could be a pro that outweighs the con of being on the computer a little bit longer. And we're looking at, if we do need to, expanding those opportunities and trying to develop those connections if there's the student appetite to do so, if we arrive at that juncture. Middle school athletics, and sorry if I'm rolling really fast, you guys have been on here a long time. Stop me if you have any questions. Middle school athletics, we're tentatively set to open up registration August 24th. And begin practices on September 8th, which would be our second week of school. One of the most limiting challenges across middle school and high school will be our ability to fill a schedule. At the middle school level particularly, they're hit the hardest because we play a lot of local schools, which is mainly made up of the Middle Border Conference. We do play River Falls and Richmond, and we have played Chippewa Falls and Menominee previously in some sports. But that schedule got thinned out quite a bit. From there, when you look at our tentative options for middle school athletics, we're prepared for either. A condensed fall schedule would certainly be condensed this year. And sports specific, we get into high risk, low risk, and which ones we'd be comfortable with right now and what types of strategies we'd have in place. The middle school, I think we're a little bit more flexible and it's a little bit more conducive into being able to roll into in-house sports specific practices. Those could be modified, shortened, could be 1 or 2 days a week. And the main focus of that would be to continue that sports specific development. That option would of course be if we're still in person and able to provide that opportunity in person. As well as the next one, if we were to cancel the seasons, we would look to explore what more intramural offerings could be available to our students, again, if there was the interest to do so, and again, if we were still in person. The main theme at the middle school is just to keep them involved in something. If we have the appetite to go one direction or the other, we'd love to, if that's something that is available to us at that level. think then we get to the high school, and this is more of our, I guess, time sensitive conversation or decision. Registration has already began at the high school level. We do have the 2 delayed dates per WIA of August 17th for the low risk and September 7th for the high risk. And we're ready for any of those options. Obviously, we still are counting on some information from the Department of Health and the WIA and DPI and what may come out this week and throughout the end of the week, likely. As we look at our fall season, our conference and many of the conferences that are going to continue, if not all at this point, are going conference only schedules. For a little bit of perspective on why, it's to not necessarily limit travel in our situation. We still have to travel quite a bit, but it's to control a consistent group of teams that we can communicate with and be able to manage and reduce the exposure. As we get into the different levels, there are the 2 levels. So we have cross country, girls golf, marching band, girls tennis, and girls swim and dive starting tentatively on Monday if we are going to move forward. Cheer and stunt, dance line, football, boys soccer, and volleyball are labeled high risk. Those were both identified by the WIAA. Their first date of competition varies by sport. Some as limited as girls golf only need to get 3 days of practice in, where football needs 3 full weeks of practice before they can play their first game. So there's a wide range of when competitions would actually start. For perspective across the state, there are areas where some have canceled fall sports altogether. There are most, like I said, have gone non-conference if they are going to try and pursue something in the fall. If we go to our next start select fall season section or option, there are some conversations beginning, not only in our conference, but across the state. And as you've seen across the river in Minnesota, where some programs are identified as a lower risk. They're going to try and pursue those programs this fall, and they are looking at rescheduling or a potential option for the higher risk to move to, usually it looks like a spring model where they're trying to squeeze in winter, fall, and then spring moves a little bit into the summer. I did put the NFHS risk levels in there. And the reason I did so is because in Minnesota, they moved football and volleyball, but they left soccer. But if you look at WIA, football, volleyball, and soccer are all in our high risk. So the NFHS has been referenced a few times in terms of how the risk levels are determined and how things are being decided upon, if that's something you'd like to reference. The last and third option, I think the last thing anybody wants to do is cancel and end somebody's opportunity, especially if they were only a fall athlete or fall participant in any other activity. I would vote that I would recommend that if we don't pursue fall activities, that we do leave it open to be able to pursue one of the WIA alternate season plans. From my understanding, and maybe Nick has heard something similar or different, I think the WIA is trying to paint a clear picture of what those alternate seasons would look like. And that is in the link there are many options across the bottom part of a tab that lay out what those start dates would look like, how many weeks they'd have for regular season, and if they were to do playoffs. One really last thing in terms of that topic, the playoffs are very secondary in conversations, even up through the WIA. Solely, we are just trying to provide competitive opportunities for kids. If that is a 4-game regular season and that's what we get in, that is better than what our spring sports got in this past year. And I think people are not going to be hung up on if we don't make it to a state tournament. Some may, but I think the masses just want opportunities for the students. So I guess before we open it up to questions, a couple things to close on. As we move forward, we do expect more information. So I guess how you'd like me to proceed would be, beneficial in terms of decisions and what we may or may not learn from DPI, DHS, or WIA. And then, with the time sensitive nature along the same lines, how do we want to go about that decision making?
Questions, comments, concerns from board members?
Mr. President.
Rob?
So Aaron, have you had a chance to talk with the coaches of the high risk sports by chance? And if so, what are their thoughts on, moving forward in the fall?
I think they've mirrored a very similar stance, and they would obviously prefer to have a season if it were something that we could carry out and do so with mitigated risk, but would absolutely be willing to pursue that season in any way, shape, or form throughout the 2021 school year. I know some would find it a little bit, I guess, a little bit of a con to move it to the spring, because the spring sports are what just got moved this past year, and to displace those students was a concern. But it's certainly something that we can work around if it means that is the probably safest and best area where we may be able to fit seasons in. So collectively, the coaches have been very receptive and responsive to being flexible to where we fit best.
Sue?
Yeah, I liked your point, Aaron, about that. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but providing the students with some opportunity for, sports, whether it ends up being, going to around the state for competitions. And I think I saw the word intramural in here somewhere. So I think that idea, kids love to throw a ball or, hit a hockey puck or whatever. And so I think if we can have some kind of a program following to our best of our ability to have safer practices is ideal. So I'm supportive of whatever you can do. And I think I'm guessing that we're not going to return to, statewide competitions.
Yeah, thanks. And that reminds me of one point. I find it really important to bring up. Our coaches did a really, really good job this summer, in my opinion. But that's with physical distancing, masks, no contact, limited numbers. I just want us to be aware of what a jump that would be to be able to head into our sports seasons. And with all the mitigation strategies, I have no doubt that we could carry those out and do that safely. And if that's where we think we can land and we can offer those opportunities, that's great. If we can't, we could look at things that we could do in-house, as Sue had mentioned.
Mr. President?
Yes.
So Aaron, of the list of fall sports, are there, including the high risk, are there any here that you feel that we simply cannot do safely?
Yeah, and when you get into competition, there are certainly sports that lend itself to more physicality. Football is a hot topic right now, not just in our community, but nationwide. The Big Ten canceled their football season today. The MIAC and WIAC are also local Division III conferences that have moved their fall. If I were to say high contact, you're going to start with football, soccer, and cross country at times. Everything can lend itself to contact until you get into the individual sports where it could be a little bit more controllable. And why I add cross country is just the numbers. And we're looking at ways to limit the numbers condensed in one area with cross country, for example, with phases and waves and reduced traffic areas at the finish line. Volleyball is a different one where there's not as much physical contact, but they are inside and they are within close proximity at times throughout.
Do you have a recommendation as far as what to do. I mean, you're living this, you and the administration are living this. I can only speak for myself, but as a board member, we started at 5:30 and, I'm happy to listen and help and provide my 2 cents, which is probably not even worth 2 cents anymore. And so if you have a recommendation, that would be great. I don't have enough knowledge in all of this to give you direction. I'm happy to listen, and maybe there's other people here, my fellow board members, who have more insight and knowledge on this type of thing. If you're looking for a recommendation and a motion from me or the board, I'm not prepared to. This is just too big, affects too many people, and is too immersive in everything that this means, especially for our students and our coaches, for me to come up with something. And again, I'm only talking for myself.
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Did
go ahead.
somebody else have something?
No, go ahead.
I think there's two directions we can go. I believe that we should offer sports programs this fall if we could. If this was our best opportunity of the year, nobody knows that right now, but if this was our best opportunity of the year and we could mitigate risk and offer some of our sports, I think it's in our best interest to get those kids that opportunity. And work closely with the individual programs to adhere to whatever guidelines we're going to be working within once practices start and once the season starts. The other option that we could pursue is we could establish a further delay of our seasons. What the reason why that would maybe come into discussion would be the information that we're still waiting on by Friday. If WIA and DPI and DHS come out with information that changes our path or our scope of what we're hoping to offer, we basically have a weekend until kids show up on Monday ready to go. And is that enough time? And do we feel comfortable making sure that our coaches can have time to prepare and make sure that we can meet the guidelines? So those would be my two recommendations. In terms of what sports, that's where things get more complex. I can certainly come up with options. I'd like to do that a little bit more collaboratively if possible.
Mr. President?
Yes, Bruce.
And some of those lower risk sports, cross country, you could have teams run the same track on different days. There are some virtual type opportunities, swimming and diving, even girls golf. You could have kids play at different times. You could space them out at different holes. There's some of that already happens, but I'm just saying that there's a lot I think that can be done that gets you competition where you're uploading, either times or scores. Obviously can't do that with tennis, but I'm hopeful that we can compete as much as we can, to your point. But I do think we need to wait to see what WIA is going to come out with on Friday, because I think without whatever decision we may make, it could impact those that we may be competing with. And I just think it'd be prudent for us to get that information that's coming out on Friday.
Mr. President. So Nick, you're looking for action tonight?
Well, I guess the problem is waiting till Friday is sports are supposed to start on Monday, at least some of them.
So
you could make a motion that says, okay, start at least the August 17th sports as planned, unless.
Well, if I may, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move to give the administration the authority to act in the best interest of our students in this regard. And if there's any additional detail in that motion that's required, let me know and I'll add it.
I think to add what Nick was saying, maybe with
Accepted.
at least the 17th, the August 17th, because that's Monday.
Yeah.
And we'll be back together again before the 7th.
And to
So-
allow
So you guys would allow,
administration to make the decision to act in the best interest of our students and to allow the August 17th low risk sports to commence.
so as of right now, it is allow the 17th to start. And if something comes out from the WIA that changes that, then we would have the authority to cancel.
Correct.
Essentially.
Correct.
Or
So-
postpone or whatever. we need.
Postpone, cancel.
And again,
but-
whatever the
but the board
administration-
itself is making the decision to continue to move forward with the 17th. That's not an administrative decision.
Correct.
Unless there's something to pull it away because of something that comes out from the WIA.
Second.
That's Rob's motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Bob, second it. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, motion passes. All right.
I do have a question that would not have affected my vote, but I couldn't get the word out before we moved from discussion to action. So as far as the intersection, Aaron, between this plan and then the grid that we reviewed earlier, I mean, my assumption is that if we go to remote because the high school closes down, we also would not be I mean, that would stop sports. Correct?
Correct.
Yep. I mean, and that's,
Really?
Aaron and I have even said, if we go to a hybrid model, we would probably not be allowing sports. If we can't have
Now-
our kids in school all the time, it'd be awfully hard for us to justify having them coming to practice every day. Go ahead. Aaron.
One important clarification would be that if a student selects IDL or virtual and we are offering in person, that they could participate.
Yep.
But as we move down the matrix, that's where we would start making the decisions in respect to the activities offerings.
And any student, similarly, any student who for health reasons has to move to an IDL is identified through contact tracing as needing to isolate, et cetera, during that period of time that they cannot come to school or
Yeah,
could not
they're
come to
allowed
school.
Yep.
They also would not be
Correct.
allowed to participate.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Aaron, for that clarification. All right. Next up is the 2021 Certified Staff Handbook. This was discussed in the last work session at length, all the different changes.
I don't know if Andrea, were there any changes since the last work session? Do you know?
The only thing that I know is that Holly did go through and modify. We had a couple situations where they had a he and she. And so we did we either changed it to the generic reference of employee or staff member or did the he, she, they.
So no substantive changes
No.
since you guys saw it. I mean, it's been more grammatical and go ahead, Sue.
I would just like to move to approve the certified handbook as updated.
Second.
All right, moved in second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. Next up is the 2021 Support Staff Handbook.
And I would say the same thing with that one. It's just been tweaks since.
Move to approve the support employee handbook.
Second.
All right, I'll give the second to Heather. I think it was simultaneous with Carrie, but, oh,
You're getting shut out tonight, Carrie.
Carrie's got to be quicker to the punch. All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the changes to the Support Employee Handbook for 2021, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same, or nay. Hearing the results, the ayes have it. All right. Next up is the second reading of student policies 412.1 through 423. These are 6 policies and 1 rule. Incorporation, we've already had substantive discussion at work session and a first reading. This is now second reading. And Andrea, has any board member suggested any changes?
I'm not aware of them since the changes we've already integrated prior to the first reading.
All right. So this is identical to the first reading. Is there a motion?
So moved.
All right, Carrie moved. Bob, you got second?
Second.
All right. We have a motion, a second to approve
Oh,
the
dear.
second reading of the student policies. I won't say every number, but they're 412.1 through
As
423
presented, yeah.
As presented. Yeah.
as presented. All right, previously. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed, same sign. The ayes have it for approval, so that is approved. Last up, we have the equity book study. I think everyone has picked up their book.
And this is under action item. Nick, what you're just going to lay out?
Well, I think you had kind of laid it out in an email you sent to the board. You wanted to have the first couple of chapters read prior to the.
Well, at least
20
through the intro, I said, so.
Oh, at least through the intro. Have the intro read prior to the 24th.
Right.
Yep. So prior to the 24th intro, I guess it's in more of a discussion item than a topic. And then,
Yeah, it's probably not action, but it could be action if there were, I think we got an email with what was an adverse review of the book. I suppose we could look up on the internet and find lots of reviews in favor or against the book and critical of the message and so forth. But if board members have read through at least the introduction, any hesitancy with moving forward?
No.
All
I
right.
was captured by just reading that part and then, thinking of personal experiences and of my own fragility and yeah, I'm ready to go.
Great. Yeah, I'm somewhat augmenting this book with our church is doing a study on how to be an anti-racist. So that's another book, another best New York bestseller, as is this White Fragility book. So
Note to the board, if you refuse to stop and pick it up, Tim will deliver it to your door.
all right, there you go. So, but I think they're all delivered, right? Right, Tim? All right. And I'm about halfway through it. I plan to finish it next week and I'm on vacation. So I think the plan would be to tackle approximately a third of it at each of the next 3 work sessions. Is that, Nick, your idea?
Yep.
All right. And
Jamie,
so,
I was just doing some quick Googling and just thinking, is there a study guide or something? And there is a discussion guide that's specifically for educator. I mean, so I think maybe what would be great is if we, as we're reading sections,
Yep.
pose specific questions ahead of time that are relevant to our role here with the district, although I'm sure there will be other things that we think of relative to our lives,
Well-
but that for me would be helpful to be thinking about, the conversation that we should be having as a school board.
I think if we sprung for the cost of 15 of these books for board and administration, we might be able to get the study guide. One study guide, and then Nick and I can share it or whatever.
Absolutely.
Well,
right.
if I may, because I asked Erin if there was a study guide when she had the idea, and she shared something with me, so I'm happy to share with the board.
Okay, well, if we already got it, great. As long as we're not infringing on anybody's copyright or,
Well, Erin would know that, but
all right.
No, in fact, the publishers put out a study guide for educators. I mean, the publishers of the book have an online PDF study guide for educators, so we could use that to guide our conversations.
Excellent, great. Any further discussion about that? Otherwise, I entertain a motion to go into closed session pursuant to the wording in the agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes.
the board will entertain a motion to convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, parent 1, parent F, to consider the financial, social, or personal histories of specific persons which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data.
Second.
All right. Motion by Carrie, second by Bruce. Calls for a roll call vote. Bauman?
Aye.
Brown?
Aye.
Hanson? Aye. Katas?
Aye.
Loglin?
Aye.
Whitaker?
Aye.
Johnson? Aye. The ayes have it. The motion is to go into closed session, and so this open session is hereby adjourned. We stand in recess.